Is in the back. There's only 2 agenda items, so don't rush to go back and get one by all means. The first order of business is for us to approve the minutes from March 11, which PJ has out. I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion that we approve the minutes of March 11th as written.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion made by Bob, seconded by Peter. All those in any further discussion? All those in favor? 5-0, just for the for PJ sitting in the back and our 5th member. So, all right. Next order of business, update from chairs and member. I'm just going to briefly say that at the next meeting, I talked to Bill Nemers about coming in and speaking with us about the planning board, the proposed bylaws that are on the ATM warrant that they're proposing. So he's going to come in and explain those.
The next meeting?
That's the next meeting on April 1.
Yeah.
All right. So now we'll turn our attention to this evening's main business, which is our discussion with our colleagues from the Maynard Public Schools and School Committee. Thank you for being here. We'll be covering 2 important topics: the recent challenges at Green Meadow Elementary School and our customary annual discussion about the next year's fiscal year's Maynard Public Schools budget. As many of us in the room are aware, the FY 2020 budget is very important, but also a little further along because we've had a lot of discussions about that, and so that's taking second place. On the other hand, this is the first substantive discussion that we on the Finance Committee have been able to have with our colleagues on the School Committee and the Maynard Public Schools on the issues at Green Meadow, and so that's why we're going to start there. I'd say a lot of work has gone into laying the groundwork for these discussions, choice of location to have it here, as well as how we'll be conducting it is going to be the one that best enables us, the Finance Committee, to carry out our duty to make inquiries and gather information. To gather information effectively on behalf of the town meeting voters that we serve, in other words, on your behalf. So to the audience, I'd note that this meeting, like all Finance Committee meetings, is a public meeting. It is a business meeting held in an open forum where everybody's presence and learning is certainly welcome and encouraged. That said, it's not a public hearing this evening, where public comments constitute a major component of the meeting. And I would say, in light of how much ground that we need to cover this evening, I expect that we'll have little or no time to devote to taking comments on this. Nevertheless, there'll be ample opportunity for you to contribute public comments at further meetings when we will turn our attention making decisions on the information that we gather this evening. So I'd appreciate your allowing us to conduct our business as we must in order to complete our information gathering this evening so that we can then deliberate on these later on. I also need to make you aware that this meeting is being recorded on WAVM for the benefit of those in our community who are not able to attend tonight. It's also being broadcast live on the town's Verizon cable channel. So let's get started. With our target time being about an hour to talk about the Green Meadow issues, and we have an initial list of 15 questions. Dawn, I would encourage you and your colleagues to give us a complete response that's concise so that we can get through all these. If we need to go longer than 2 hours, then we'll certainly also extend that time. However, if it looks like we're going to continue, both discussions past 10 o'clock, then we may have to break and continue our discussion at a future meeting, and that's fine. To provide some context for this evening, I think we'd all agree that the disruption we've experienced through the recent events at Green Meadow Elementary School and the impact on the health of those who work and learn at Green Meadow, to their educational process, to the town's finances, even to the civic accord in our community, shouldn't happen again, and that's what we're going to work towards. So our focus this evening is going to be really focusing on the options to move us forward in the near term, because obviously we've got to do that, but also in the long term, because there are some long-term issues that we want to address. And then I'd also like to make sure that the committee has a clear understanding of the pros and cons of those options, impact of implementing those options, as well as how to prevent this kind of disruption from happening again. So I'm going to jump off with the first question that I had sent to you. Just briefly, if you could tell us what health hazards have been detected or suspected at Green Meadow Elementary School. How and when did they come to light? What have we been able to determine about their causes? And were there signs of the hazards that should have tipped us off to the impending problems?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to introduce folks who are here in case not everyone's met everyone. So my name is Dawn Capello. I'm serving as Vice Chair of the School Committee. Seated to my side here is Michelle Resendez, the School Business Manager, Dr. Bob Girardi, Superintendent of Schools. We have the full school committee in the front row. And if we need a technical question answered, I know that Aaron McCloskey is here as well. So if we need him, we may not. He's also in the audience. So with that said, in terms of what health hazards, I want to sort of lead off by saying that during the discussion, I want to make very clear there are concerns and there's evidence. And at different times, I'll probably use those words very carefully so we can follow along between the concerns that were raised and what we found out when we investigated. The first concern raised last September was in terms of mold, and there one staff member came forward reporting concerns about mold, specifically related to their own personal situation, and that is really what kicked off the investigation. So from an employment standpoint, if we have an employee who's concerned, or a staff member, a parent, anyone who's concerned about the quality of the building, we obviously have to take that very seriously. So the mold investigation began last September. I have sent the chairman links to all of the documents that are online, and I'll probably refer to those a lot tonight, but most of what I would quote now in terms of what we've done is under the Green Meadow Air Quality Concern Debrief, dated January 24th, 2019. So depending if you've read that and how much detail you want, I can go into a great detail about who we brought in, what test results, what tests were run and what results we saw. But at the end of the day, I can jump to the end and say that there was no health hazard related to mold found.
Okay.
In January, right around the 25th, I believe, a different concern was raised, and that is in the area of asbestos. We had a small piece of a ceiling tile fall in a kindergarten classroom. The concern around that was that when asbestos is airborne, it can become a health hazard, and that kicked off a separate investigation where we brought in the insurance company, the Department of Public Health, Division of Labor Services, who oversee OSHA, so really all the appropriate state authorities. In terms of asbestos, I've learned a lot more about that than I ever realized I would in my lifetime. Many old buildings have asbestos. I'm sure my house has some. I'm sure many of our houses have some. Dangerous asbestos, as I've been taught recently, is when it becomes ground into a very fine mist and becomes airborne in a decent quality.
And this is what's called friable?
I believe that is what is called friable, exactly. So we
I
investigate.
too have learned more about asbestos.
Yes, it is.
recent weeks.
And I won't lie, I didn't do well in science in school, so I was more of a math girl. So I don't want to go too far into one question. I know you've got many questions, but at the end of the day, we brought folks in that timeline was a little bit longer in terms of the investigation, but even that investigation showed that there were no health hazards related to asbestos in Green Meadow. So I'll let you lead the questions and discussion. We're happy to provide all and any answers.
So just to clarify, you're saying that no evidence was found, your point before about evidence versus concerns.
Exactly.
Real
So
concerns.
we had concerns, and I don't want to belittle those. You have to take those things very, very seriously. I was very relieved at the end to get very good test results, but that's summarizing a multi-month process, so I don't want to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where are we in the questions? Sorry.
Oh, so I guess, you said what were detected or suspected, how they came to light.
Right.
Have we, so the causes, I assume, is some sort of damage to the ceiling that allowed,
Right, that is the part of the building that tends to have a roof leak every
Yeah.
once in a while. So I think what I saw, because I was there on the first day with the insurance company and Mr. McCloskey and Dr. Girardi, is wet ceiling tiles will break apart and small pieces fall off. And that's certainly something to address. I don't want to mince any words there, but that's different than dry asbestos that breaks apart and becomes a mist. This was wet asbestos that fell in a chunk, about 2 inches, I'd say.
so I assume that we knew about the fact that these tiles were asbestos,
Yes,
and we knew that there were leaks there, so we knew that this was a risk, I assume, right?
yes.
And so that would be, I guess, a sign that there's something that's happening.
Yeah, you'll see if you go back into previous records for money that we've put towards Green Meadow, we've
Yeah.
been, for good or for bad, limping along with that section of roof with what I call the patch and pray method versus a whole new roof for that section of the building, which would be about $2 million. And that gets further into your questions down
Sure.
below, but that's certainly some numbers to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So not only, and this goes back, I would say, previous facilities directors, previous town administrators. This is a long, unfortunate road, this
Okay.
particular part of the roof.
Any other questions on question one? So then let's move on to question two. What remediation work, testing, cleaning, repairs, et cetera, have been completed? Question three asks about what is to be completed, so you may end up, wanting to answer both these questions sort of in serial, although it would be helpful to distinguish what has happened and therefore we're already paying for
Sure.
versus what is yet to come.
Yep.
So related to these recent issues associated with the detected or suspected hazards, also like to have an understanding of the total costs associated with the work, because this leads up to the question that we have in terms of how we're going to
Absolutely.
fund that. What portions are expected to be covered by insurance? And so that would be helpful.
Sure. I'm going to start with, for no particular reason, but in terms of the mold, all of the testing has obviously been done. All the results have come in. Since 2016, we've been doing, like I said, the patch and pray method of roof repairs on that particular wing. We have done replacements of air filters. We have ordered some air purifiers. Although not recommended necessarily, we thought that with the concern level with the staff and the parents, that it was fair to put additional air purifiers in the room. So those, I think, shipped from Tennessee today. So those should be here ASAP. So we'll be adding additional air purifiers in addition to the already existing univent systems in each classroom. So those things have already been ordered or already have happened in terms of mold testing and some of the recommendations that we're following. In terms of the asbestos, we broke it down into phases. So phase one, which was the testing and replacement specifically of the ceiling in the hallway by the cafeteria and music room, has already been completed. So that was part of our requirements to be able to reopen the wing after February vacation. The total cost for that, and again, this is all on the website as well, but we're happy to send any documents so you don't feel like you have to scribble everything. The hallway, cafeteria, music room was $15,884. And phase two, if we're talking about the preschool and K wing, which is the oldest wing of the building, the decontamination of all of the items we wanted to keep from, or we hoped to keep from that wing was $261,000, and that has already been done. And that was to salvage furniture and computers, but not small things or anything fabric-based or learning materials. And I'm hoping you all saw I've sent over the spreadsheet that illustrates all the costs totaling over $700,000.
Yep.
So that takes us through phase 2 in terms of asbestos remediation.
So could you tell me a little bit about what you mean by the phases? What do you, what's the sense of those phases, I guess, to sort of help us?
I think, to be honest, it was just really to keep track in our minds. You know,
Okay.
so we had different parts
No,
of the
that's fine.
building, different
Okay.
projects, so there's nothing really, really to it other than just trying to give names to
Yeah.
projects. So
Yeah.
phase 1 was specifically by the cafeteria music room. Phase 2 was specifically decontamination of the closed wing. Phase 3, which will start on April 2nd, and I just feel bad, I don't want to jump around. We've been
No.
living it, so to me, it makes total sense, but if I'm losing you, please,
No, that's fine.
please make sure I pause. Phase 3 will be the actual abatement of the asbestos ceiling tiles in the pre-K, K wing. That will begin on April 2nd and take 3 weeks. Cost of that is $189,000, and that is the portion that will be covered by the insurance claim.
So I had asked for you all to send me the contracts, which you did, thank you. And you sent me essentially three contracts, I think. So, let's see here. Let's make sure I go through my notes. So this goes back to the service master contracts and the UEC contracts and the SNS abatement contracts. And so those three are the ones that you already spoke of, the 261 that's already been done, the 15,884, which has already been done, and the abatement, which has already been done for 189.
That one starts on April 2nd.
And that starts on April 2nd. Sorry, excuse me, you said that. And that's the one that is being covered by insurance.
Correct.
Okay. Right?
Phase 4 is work that will be done before we reopen the wing at the end of the summer, and it goes into rewiring, installation of the new ceiling tiles, plumbing repairs. I'm reading off a list now, so bear with me. Plumbing repairs to shut off the valves. There's long been thought that, so I don't exactly, I'm not a plumber, but there's been there's also water sort of in the classrooms, like in the plumbing and in the pipes, so it's a really good time for us to rip out these really old kitchenettes that just are moist and just not well maintained. So those are going to be ripped out. Small things like repainting the wing, and then we go into things like replacing curriculum, classroom materials, the leveled library, which we lost due to the contamination concerns. So I'm kind of giving you a lot, so just stop me and ask along the way.
Is that phase 4 part of the list of costs you've given, or is that?
Yes.
So
It's in
one
there?
portion of that. So $100,000, we had came up with an estimate for the ceiling grid
Right.
replacement in the ceiling tiles. We have not decided if that's going to be done in-house or if that's going to be by a vendor. So that's just a real estimate at this point. The remainder of the stuff, we did not put on that expense list because we are planning on using the facility rentals revolving account, which is for maintenance of the building, to take care of the other items that are general, school maintenance items. That's normally what we would use that account for anyways, is those kind of projects. So we felt as though we could support that part of the phase 4 within the facility rental revolving.
So if I could rephrase that, if you're saying it's $774,000 for all the work that you, and it's an estimate, some of them are still
Right.
estimates, I understand. But that would be the total required in addition to doing phase 4 with other monies,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
Thank you.
But the 100,000 of Phase 4 is included in that 700,000.
Is already.
Is already,
Yeah,
yeah. I
that's-
think
that's-
you'll see the
that's the
line.
flash.
Green,
Yeah, yeah.
that's
Yeah,
not
the
marked.
replacement of the grid and the ceiling.
Right.
Because that's part of the process of getting the ceiling back intact. But the things like painting that we would normally do through our funds,
Yeah.
we would then refurbish those so that when, you know, you have the opportunity to totally refurbish that area.
Yeah.
Get rid of those kitchenettes, try to improve that area. Those are things that we would do with our funds.
Understood.
So when, so we look at that spreadsheet that you all sent, and I'm trying to get a sense for, so there's, insurance is paying part, and then you have facilities, your own you know, the school funds paying for part. So help us understand what part is, in your view, not yet covered by the budget resources that you have.
I'll give you two numbers. One includes the fines from the Division of Labor Services. If those fines stay in place, the net after taking into account insurance funding would be $610,000 to round up.
And it may be that this other 586 is without the fines? Is that what that was?
And without the fines, and I'm just, depending on, I assume this is the latest version, without the fines, it comes down to 567.
So, I'm pulling up, sorry, I'm pulling up my one spreadsheet here for a second.
Are you wanting to stay strictly in order of your questions, or is this?
No, if it makes sense to go out of order, that's fine.
I mean, as long as we're talking about costs, and, you know, I understand the school revolving fund. Of the 610 or the 567, are you anticipating there's any room in your FY19 budget to absorb any of this?
There's unfortunately there's no room in the operating budget, unfortunately. We can talk about other sources of funding if you want to jump into that. We do have a couple of small thoughts that might be helpful. I know Michelle is looking at, you may recall, we created the special education, what's the word, savings, it's not savings account. Stabilization fund. Some of the items that we've had to replace are certainly in the realm of special education when it comes to some of the occupational therapy and physical therapy equipment. So Michelle may come forth with an article, supported obviously by the school committee, at town meeting to delve into some of those funds.
It doesn't have to be at town meeting.
Oh,
It just
I'm
has
sorry,
to
I
be
forget the process
approval
'cause it's
by- Right. The initial setup of the fund had to be at town meeting, which we did last year.
Right.
But now that it's funded, it's actually something, just an approval by school committee and approval of Board of Selectmen.
What's the balance of that
I
fund?
believe it's 29,000?
29,000.
29,000? Yep, yep.
And you have at least that much of special ed costs?
I believe we do, yes.
We just have to double check that, but.
Right.
Okay.
The other thing that might help, and again, this is under the maybe category, is I was approached by our school committee representative on Assabet Valley, and in the past, 2 town administrators ago, we had a really great relationship with Assabet Valley, and I know that the students there are amazing and can help with some projects, so they encouraged us, once we sort of get through this phase now, if there's anything that the students can help with. So we might be able to help save some labor costs there. So that's a new idea that was brought to us through Assabet and our collaboration with them. So we'll be looking at that as well. So I can't promise any big things, but we're certainly looking.
So we're assuming that a lot of the, you know, for example, you talked about replacement of the tiles and grids. Yeah, that's after the abatement's all done, so there's no reason why the students couldn't be involved.
That's what I
with
mean,
that.
right? Once we know
The
it's,
painting and
Right.
so forth.
and we'll be looking at our own staff as well. So if we've got staff that can help with some of that, that's going to be, obviously help with some of the labor costs.
So I think we've sort of covered 2 and 3 in the sense that we've talked about what's been completed and what hasn't been completed. So, the 5, you said 564, which is what it is without the fines, okay?
67.
567, thank you. Thank you. So that would be the, primarily the 261, the 15,000 and change, $100,000, and then there's a whole long laundry list of.
There's a list, yep.
Of expenses, including staffing. There's labor in there, staff. There's a page there that you gave.
Curriculum materials, right.
Right.
That's all in there, yep.
That staffing page was for the overtime over the weekends that
Correct.
we reset up the classrooms.
Is that, yeah, are you covering that overtime through your own
We already
fund?
have, we've already paid out.
Okay.
But that was done to necessitate getting the building open
Right.
as
Right.
quickly as possible
Yep.
to make
Yep.
the disruption as minimal as possible.
Right.
So, sorry, I might have missed it, but that is included in this bottom line number?
Mhm.
Because you paid it out,
We've paid it out.
it's
I
put you
technically didn't
in
have it.
deficit.
Well, I'm not in a deficit at this point because we still have the remainder of the year, so,
You're projecting that
Correct.
that's not something
Yeah.
you have money to cover if you pay everything else.
correct.
Yeah.
And then, my understanding is some parents at Green Meadow have done some good stuff as far as fundraising or.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Materials. All
Definitely.
of this stuff is in addition to that.
Correct.
That's correct.
Yeah. This is more of like the curriculum materials versus, books for the classroom, other supplies. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So you mentioned in there, so any other questions on 2 or 3? So you had mentioned in there some things that I think get to number 4, which is work that's not necessarily remedial in nature, at least not related to the asbestos, but through other things. And so you mentioned plumbing. Is there any other work that's being done other than the plumbing?
The painting of the rooms.
While it's empty, we're going to do another comprehensive cleaning. I think it just
Correct.
makes sense after all that work. So these are just some things that we would do in wings as the opportunity arises. Also in number 4 is where we list out replacing the curriculum and the leveled library. So the leveled library, while I'm not an educator, I know it's critical that we have multiple copies of the same books to understand where the kids are in their learning. And the value of the leveled library at the time was $40,000, and that was all lost because every page of every book would have had to been wiped down due to the fear of asbestos.
Okay.
So we are looking at the best way to replace it. I'm certainly advocating, even though I'm not an educator, for online resources, but there's something to holding a book in your hands that my educators say is very important. So I know we're looking at the right ways to do that, so I don't know if it's going to be $40,000, that's why it's an estimate, but we're going to do our best with that.
Okay.
And then you had also mentioned earlier rewiring.
Yep, so all of the electrical has to be rewired because of the ceiling being removed. So we have to rewire all of our lights and everything in that whole wing.
Because you're taking small squares like this and putting in a ceiling, it's going to have to be rewired to fit the new ceiling tiles as opposed to the old ones.
Oh, the lighting fixtures.
Yes.
themselves.
Fixtures and
Yeah.
so forth.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good visual. It's going to go from looking like this, although 1955 style, to standardized drop ceilings that most of us are familiar with.
Okay. Is there anything else on the cost estimates page that we need to?
So you were asking for additional efforts beyond abatement, and, I got a feel for it, but he was looking for something that gave kind of a round number of that cost associated with that work. That was in addition.
Oh,
to
for number
abatement.
4?
Yeah,
Number 4, the estimate is around $150,000.
okay.
100 being the ceiling tiles, 50 being sort of the rest. But we can break that down for you and provide it. That's not a
Close
problem.
enough. That's good.
And that's all from the school building fee revolving fund?
Nope, the 100,000 is still the ceiling tiles and the ceiling grid,
Sorry, yep, okay.
but the 50,000 is what we're estimating we'll be able to use out of the facility revolving account to accommodate for the rest of the work that we're gonna do.
So I guess maybe I'm asking it differently. You're saying the 100K for replacement of tiles, grid, pre-K, and hallway, that's the 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest was 50K, but there is this, I think the question was, correct me if I'm wrong, additional work beyond abatement for getting rid of things.
Yep.
And it may be related to kind of knock down mold and all that kind of stuff by
Yep.
leaking things. But the additional work that isn't specifically abatement related, is there an estimate of that cost?
That's That's what we're estimating around 50,000 for. So like, there's no actual work after the abatement that technically has to be done in those rooms.
And it'd be
It's
covered-
general maintenance.
Covered by the general maintenance funds. Sorry,
Yes.
I finally think I
Yep.
caught
No,
up.
it's okay. Yep. And like I said, we've been living it, so
Yeah.
make
Sure.
sure we're giving you
No, I
coherent
appreciate it
answers.
very much.
Anything else?
Nope.
Anything else?
Nope.
All right, so I guess the next question is, what assurances can you provide that the work that has been done will be performed sufficient to resolve the issues completely? And associated with that is what monitoring will be done to ensure that the issues have been completely resolved? And what additional steps might need to be taken if at some point in the future we find out that the work wasn't sufficient to resolve this? So I guess an example of this is if, you know, I don't know, if you know, somehow we find out that there's, I don't know, a source of asbestos that was unforeseen or something like that, so.
You know, I guess maybe I'll start with your last one, Ken, and I think the key is we have asbestos in our old buildings, and the key is if it's not friable, it's not dangerous. And I think that we have to be very careful about what we address versus what we educate and answer folks on. So that's just a brief aside on that. You know, in terms of assurances, I think that we figured as a result of this process that we really need to have, you know, a contracted environmental expert to come in to the building. So the plan is to, we've already contracted with them to come in and do the visual surveys on a 6, 12, and 18, and 24-month basis. That will also give us access to an industrial hygienist service that will be on call for future issues that arise. You know, in short, I don't think that we as a small town have experts in this field, so we are good about identifying our needs, and this is what we need, is we need, you know, we need folks that will come in on a regular basis, regardless of who's here in the future, right? You know, we're all here right now, but we could have different people in 6 to 12 months, so let's get plans in place. So let's get the experts on call. It's similar to how we have Wayne Amico as our engineering person downstairs. So we have people, we need them, so that'll be the, that'll be one major change. They will do risk assessment, loss control services, and also, and I'm reading from notes here, we have an approved DLS abatement plan that begins April 2nd. So I think the key is there's also state oversight. So actually, I've been really personally pleased that there is this state oversight. Maynard's a small town. We don't have experts in everything, and we're not afraid to call in the state agencies and make sure that we do it right. So I feel good going forward.
How does this, I guess a related question would be, how does the fact you'd be having inspections at 6, 12, 18, 24 months, we're due, if we had the last reinspection in 2017, then we're due for another one in 2020, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that dovetail into that process?
In terms of, like, I feel like we'll have eyes on the oldest part of the building more often,
Well, and also,
unless I'm misunderstanding.
well, I think you're asking, in addition to those inspections, what about the 3-year annual reports? And in fact, I know that the environmental consultant is the person who will be doing that for us. So again, we've contracted out, and that was part of our process, you know, agreeing to figure out how do we make sure these happen now in the future. And so as far as the 3-year annuals, it will also be the environmental consultant that serves the town.
Okay, so we're doing this, we're taking actions now with an eye to the fact that we have another reinspection in 2020 that we need to get ready for, okay. All right, any other questions on this so far?
Is it possible to, you know, generally talk about other sources of asbestos at Green Meadow?
What, I don't, what do you mean?
So,
Like, if there's,
that we're aware of.
So in our HERA reports that are posted online, they actually document every piece of questionable or presumed or parts to asbestos. There are, I don't know off the top of my head what they are, but I know in that report it does specify.
There is a report,
So there's a
so
fair
there's a report, and it's online, it's the 2008 bulk sampling report, and that
I don't remember from.
I don't have it off the top of my head either,
Okay,
but I do know that
There is
it's.
a fair amount besides the ceiling tile.
So it's also in the 2017 report, the
Correct.
reinspection.
Correct.
They have a list of each of the, you know, they log where all the asbestos or suspected asbestos is.
Okay.
And I, you know, so I presume we went through a reinspection in 2014 as well at some point. Isn't it every 3 years that you have to go through it?
See.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's a 3-year annual report.
right.
Yeah.
It
There was-
depends, yeah, it just depends on sort of who you're talking about. We have, you know, Department of Public Health going back to the 90s,
Yes.
2011, 2018, our HERA
Yeah.
reports in 2012 and 2017, so they seem to all be on different cycles.
Yeah.
But that's what we've been really good about, sort of just, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges that we saw was just sort of gathering this from, you've all been around a while,
Yeah.
finding all of the records and making sure that once we find them, we scan them in and putting them online was something that we should have done a long time ago, but it was just gathering it from multiple facility managers going past way before Aaron and multiple town managers and superintendents. So not making excuses, just to me, I've been
No, no.
involved for so long, this is kind of typical Maynard record keeping, unfortunately, but we're better going forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the designated persons had passed away, so there was knowledge that was hard to find, but it was eventually found, thanks to our great facilities department.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, so I'd like to move on to number 6, which I think we've already covered. This was what funds is the school committee expecting to pay? Is the school committee expecting will pay these expenses not covered by insurance? You've already talked about that. I guess one of the things that you've already sort of touched on this, but the other question was what funds from the FY19 Maynard Schools budget can be redirected, made available to cover these costs? And you did that with the labor, but that's about it right there.
At this time, yeah.
Yeah.
I cannot, I actually had froze the budget in January before this happened, which I do every year. It's not of, it's just a way for us to reevaluate where we are and where we're going to move forward. And in looking at that, it's extremely tight, as it is most years. So I couldn't confidently say that there was any funds that we could contribute to this. Again, like as in many years, you know, last year we had 29,000 that was remaining at the end of the year. It's not an excessive amount of money. I expect us to be fairly tight this year as well.
I think one thing I would find helpful, and I'm guessing my fellow committee members would as well, is if you could give us an updated spreadsheet of what you sent us in terms of the expenses. So bring that up to date, and then if you could identify the source of funding that
Sure.
you're paying. So, you know, for example, the labor stuff, I wasn't sure what the funding source was. So if you could sit there and lay that out, and that way, and then send that to us, then we can take a look
Could
at that.
definitely do that.
And it's meant to be an evolving document as things happen, so that's perfect.
Yeah, well, so I guess the one way I'd like to see it evolve is if you could identify in your mind sort of where you're expecting that money to come from, and if you're like, we don't know,
Right.
then that's fine.
I'm
Unknown-
picking up what you're
unknown is
putting
fair.
down.
Okay,
Got it.
all right. Any other questions on the funds available question? Okay. So what reports have been received by the Maynard Public Schools during the last 10 years about detected or suspected health hazards at the Green Meadow School? And specifically, who's received them and when, and what actions were taken in response to each report? The next question gets into more detail on the March 2017 HERA report. And so if you want to include that in your discussion, that's fine. Although we're probably going to spend more time on the March 2017, so.
Okay. Going back in time, things we've been able to find from people who've been here long before us. 1990, there was a DPH inspection. Really, it's hard to tell who it went to be honest. I see the name RS Maynard Board of Health on it. 2002, Department of Public Health inspection done by Mike Feeney. Mark Masterson is listed as the superintendent at the time. 2006, Department of Public Health inspection. It lists Mark Masterson, superintendent.
Can I
Yeah, sure.
ask, were those reports specifically focused on asbestos or just general building assessments or
That was just air quality.
air quality?
Air
Okay.
quality questions in those years, and then.
Yeah. This is general air quality for those ones.
So you have actual reports from those, and do they recommend any actions that
Yes,
were to be
in
taken?
fact, many of the similar, I can tell you, because I was able to really look at those, sorry to interrupt, but even going back to 1990, there were pictures of ceiling tiles that were wet
Sure.
in the report. And it
Yeah.
said, fix those ceiling tiles. And at the time, if you look at the 2002 report, it says they did do some of the recommendations, because it's not mandatory you do all the recommendations, you're trying to improve. And so when they did a follow-up, I think it was either 2002 or 2006, they actually identified some of the recommendations were implemented. So over time, every time you get a report about air quality, they give you recommendations, you try to improve the air quality, the concerns in the facility, which our town has done, but it's always with the resources you have and the time that you have in between each time you have a concern or an inspection.
So these reports were all three schools, or
Just Green Mountain.
this is only Green Meadow we're talking about? Okay, good to hear.
I'm sorry, were these reports prompted by a just general state assessment, or were they called in by the town because of a concern?
So in addition to 1990, 2002,
Oh, thanks.
2006, there
Thank
was
you.
2011 and 2000, and then the most recent one. I believe the initial ones were either at the request of parents or staff. However, I was here in 2011 when a concern was raised, and the town administrator actually called the DPH and asked them, at the time that town administrator said, we'll call the DPH in and let's see what's going on with the school. The most recent one, because we had the concerns, we called the DPH and said, come in and do an inspection, because you're the authority on air quality in the buildings.
So generally, it's us prompting them to do the
Well, it's both.
inspection.
It can be, you know.
It can be
people who are in the
initiated
building,
either way,
Parents
yeah.
or staff, or it can be us calling them in, and the last two were us calling them in and seeking their advice.
Yep.
I just want to state the AHERA for the every 3 years is a regulation that we call someone in. So 2017, we had that report done. That was because we knew the time frame and called them in to do the AHERA inspection, not pertaining to mold.
So there would have been one in 2014 as well, for instance.
I think there was one in 2012, and I think that there was that death I talked about, and that's where, and you had transitions of people, and I'm not certain if there was one in between. I don't believe there was. So,
And just for an example, Mary just reminded us, so the 2006 DPH report referred back to what the findings were in 2002 and mentioned that they had all been dealt with. So there's a lot in here that we can certainly look back on to see what was dealt with and what wasn't dealt with. I won't claim to have it all off the top of my head by any means. But yeah, so it does look like they come in, like I said, on their annual cycles, either initiated by us or by them. But in 2006, it said they addressed everything from 2002, just to give you some context on what some of these things look like, so. And we're happy to provide them.
Thank you.
So before the recent air quality ones, the last previous one was 2011?
And what about actions, recommended actions in 2011?
so again, I know our facilities department had done everything that they could to improve the air quality once they got those recommendations.
Yeah.
Dawn mentioned them earlier, like, one of the major things was to, instead of changing the filters in the Univet system annually, now they changed them either triannually or quarterly, I'm not sure. I think it may have been triannually. As a result of the most recent one now, I think they're going to quarterly, and they're actually looking at a different filter. So every time something's identified, then our facilities department and our team, the school department, have tried to make recommendations to improve it in some way.
Mhm.
Do we have copies of the 2012 AHERA report?
Yes, somewhere. I know our facilities department keeps all that documentation.
Yeah, we can make sure you get that.
Yeah.
I will admit that part of my questioning along these lines has to do with, you know, a lot of these reports show wet ceiling tiles. And we know we have leaks in the building. We've been struggling to get ahead of them, but people were asking me in the community, about our 2013 $850,000 warrant article to try to repair both Fowler and Green Meadow roofs. So it's kind of tied into the next three of these, but relative to, 2011 and 12 reports, that at least we're getting closer to when some of us were here, right? Yeah, I guess my question would be, there seems to be, maybe the question I'm trying to ask is, was it too big a nut to be able to replace all the $2 million figure I heard quoted about all of the older part of the building's roof, where it turns out we gave back like 700,000 or something, maybe it was 650,000 of that 850,000, and used it for other capital purposes. So the question I guess I'm having, and I bet a lot of people have, is I think we're obligated to explain why we didn't do more, and maybe ask for more. Was it just assumed that we could, as we've said before, limp by with patching leaks?
Yeah, what I've done, so I've dug into that as well, and from what I can tell, and I'm not really one to say it was so-and-so or it was so-and-so, but what I have gathered is that the previous facilities director asked for that amount to cover a new roof, and it was not enough money. And the thinking shifted to the patch and pray system and to give the money back. So, I mean, that's nice, and it's obviously done the right way, but it just shows that we're sort of still limping along, to your point. So I believe they thought, whoever asked for it, and I just don't recall which board I was on at the time, if I signed it, I signed it, I don't remember. But that's what the previous facilities director did quote for the new roof.
What year was that?
2013.
2013?
And it was turned back in 2014. The balance, because there was some money spent, but that's what I'm not sure.
It was 700,000 repurposed, so
Right.
150,000.
150,000 was spent, presumably on patching both roofs.
Frankly, I
We-
vaguely remember that discussion when I was on the school committee in 2013.
And our time overlapped around that time
Yeah.
also, and I remember that, but at that time, we were trusting the facilities director at that moment to have the best interest to predict, and
Yep.
then obviously the plans.
I think we should tell them.
So,
I just wanted to
one more thing, in
mention-
fairness, my recollection was that there was a whole range of options from total replace to different parts, and we sort of struck, in fairness, I think the decision at that time was sort of to strike that middle ground of trying to get a good chunk of money
Yeah.
where we could do that. Now, I think this is worth sort of,
2020 hindsight, maybe?
well, so.
No, I mean, honestly, I'm asking the question because it's out there,
Yeah.
and people are looking at what is our planning
Right.
long-term, and yes, that is, it seems reasonable. Looking back, that's how I remember it, in fact.
Right.
But now we look at it and say, geez, it looks like we've got to, at some point, pony up, or at least enough to keep that school from leaking
Right.
for a number of years, because, we don't have a funding plan beyond that.
I just wanted to mention that article, we actually still use the funds, so that whole 150,000 was not expended before. We have been using those funds for roof repairs for the, since 2013. Currently, there is a balance of 36,375 still in that account.
Thank you for answering that, because I was thinking, how could we have turned it all back and still have an account that seems to be,
Yep.
little by little going down?
Yep, so we have been using that with
appreciate
our
that.
patch and pray method.
Yep.
And I mean, just as recently as today, I believe we sent up an invoice for some repairs to the roof that will be applied to that account.
Yep.
And to our facilities director, our current facilities director's credit, 2 years ago, he worked with me to do a statement of interest with the MSBA to replace the roof. And we brought it forward to the school committee and the board of selectmen, as the process requires you to make sure that they're going to support, if you're going to get that MSBA money, that we're going to continue to go to the town and see if we can make it happen. During the process, our facilities director and I were advised that we really should go for a whole building, not just for that roof. And so, but 3 years ago, it was identified that the patch and pray method, really, we should do something.
A new
Either replace
coin
it or
phrase.
replace the building.
So 2 questions follow on, if I could. The the amount put in for the roof MSBA request was what?
1.9 million?
Okay, so it was in that same general ballpark. And then who was it that was recommending that we shift the gears?
MS.
I'm sorry, who?
I believe MSBA shared
MSBA.
with Aaron and myself that we should consider when a building is, of its age, and in addition, even the modern wing has hills in it, its design is not ideal for a school, that maybe we should consider going for the whole school replacement.
They tend to give a lot of guidance along the way from the conversations I've had with Dr. Girardi and Mr. McCloskey. So depending on the year and what they're funding, we certainly want to follow their guidance. We all remember what working with the MSBA is like, I think, from the high school. I think we almost made the round of a roof repair, but they upped the requirement. You had to be a 30-year roof, and we were a 29-year roof. So we came close to one solution to propose, but it does seem to be a little bit like a moving target.
Yeah.
So then the following year, I think we applied for two different paths. Yeah. And that's just that's a conversation for all the boards to be having, on behalf of their constituents. I think where you were starting to go, Bob, was kind of, yes, there's the past and what's gone on there and what we can learn from that, but also sort of what is our plan for the building going forward. We think when you look at the capital plan, and we've talked about this in the budget subcommittee meetings, there is a placeholder, as much as you can use the placeholders when you don't have a lot of revenue coming in for the town, for a new green meadow in the area of 2025, and that goes back to the previous assistant town administrator running the capital planning. So it's a known need, and it's sort of, I think, for all of us to be discussing, because we're all involved in the town finances. Do we keep putting chunks of money towards this particular wing when we know we're going to need a new building, and when is that process? So I think those are the conversations that we should be continuing to have, because I don't think it's just up to, you can ask 5 people on the school committee on behalf of the parents, what should we do? But we have a lot of needs in the town. We know the fire station's on folks' radar. So there's a lot of talk. I think there's a lot of discussion to be had about what we do with our capital. So I'm not trying to jump ahead or anything, but I feel like that's where your heading is.
Well, yeah.
Should we do with the building? Should we keep putting $100,000 in every year and replacing the ceiling tiles over and over and over again? Or what happens if we get accepted into the program? There's some big what ifs coming.
Well, so I think part of the issue from our perspective is if we do get accepted in the program, then we're going to have to the town's going to have to come up with a chunk of change as well that goes along with that. And is that in our capital plan, which right now it is not. And so we need to get that in there and plan out, okay, where does that fall? Where that falls will determine how long it's going to be before we're able to replace that building.
Sure.
And if we're not going to be able to replace that building, 6 years from now, then we definitely going to need to do something about the roof, whether MSBA thinks that's a good idea or not.
That's exactly what I would have said. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and as a town, right? As a town, do we want to invest $2 million of our own dollars for a building that we know we're going to repair at some point, and we kind of at least know sort of the range of the some point?
So my 2 cents on that, this is my opinion,
This is good, yeah.
is that that sounds logical, but there is no, when Ken said that if the previous acting town administrator put a plug in 2024, actually.
Oh, okay.
It was by reducing the budget across the board for everyone in a way that you will not like.
Right.
Right. So.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
And we started this conversation, as you know, as boards 2 years ago in December, and we are still grappling with the same reality, which is, excuse the expression, but not a snowball's chance anywhere that we're going to have that building in 2024, right? Whether we do the fire station or not, and even if we did an override.
Right.
And we've got solid data this year, really graphed, out for 4 years for both revenue coming in and expenses, and that kind of pushes the question toward, I'm sorry, but I think we really need to repair that roof enough, to your point, that we're not constantly putting ourselves at risk, not just from tiles, but who knows what else could go wrong with leaks.
Well, we found out what went wrong.
Yeah,
We're now
so-
having to replace a whole bunch of
Right.
furniture and curriculum materials and a whole bunch of other stuff.
To the tune of almost $1 million, right? Let's call it. All right, so it's we're all learning, every
Yeah.
one of us, and I'm not trying to blame anyone at all for this. I'm honestly not. I'm saying if we're really going to look squarely at how to deal with this, we've got to have a better plan than saying, let's go to MSBA, get them to approve new school, and then try to guess where we're going to come up with a 20 or some odd $1 million bond and pay for that, which we can't afford right now, not without more revenue. So, that said, it's a little bit of a soapbox, and I
That's okay.
apologize, but
No, but I think it's really important.
I think it's time we said, you know, if really that roof needs to be repaired and 850,000 wasn't enough, if I had my time machine, I would have gone back and said, let's put another 850,000 toward it and get that thing fixed. But
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't have that machine.
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that I talked to my fellow board members about at the last meeting is when these kind of reports come in, we really ought to be having a more mindful discussion about the implications. Because quite frankly, you know, sitting there saying the roof leaks, that's one thing. To have any sort of concept of the kind of disruption that this has ended up being to the health of the teachers and the students,
Right.
to the educational process, to our budget, to the civic accord within our community, you know, I think anybody would have said, geez, you know, that's a pretty big impact. And I'll tell you, you know, if, you know, in 2013, when we were talking about this and I was on the school committee, I'll say, well, I didn't realize that kind of impact. So I think when we have these kind of reports, we need to have a very purposeful conversation of how we're going to fix it. And, you know, these recommendations are not really recommendations, certainly not, you know, certainly not here. So to close out this question, I guess what I would say is if you could send a list of the reports that you have, that you found, that would be helpful. Anything else on this?
I'm sorry, are you talking both questions? Including 8 or just 7?
No, just 7 so far.
Okay.
I jumped to 10 a little bit, I
Yeah.
apologize.
We've jumped around a little bit, but it's
But for a good reason.
All right.
totally agree.
Number 8, how was the March 2017 AHERA report handled by the Maynard Public Schools and School Committee after its receipt? What was the Maynard Public Schools and School Committee's interpretation of the recommendations, the timelines in those reports?
I mean, in terms of how it was handled, I think that how I read it they were recommendations. You know, and I think
So this
that's-
came to the school committee's attention?
Not at the time, no, this is me reading it
So
more
that's why I
recently.
guess I'm asking is,
Right.
when
Oh,
that
I'm sorry.
when that report comes in, who
Right.
does it go to?
I believe it goes to the central office. I don't know if it goes to town hall. Bob, you might know better.
I believe it went to the facilities department and the designated person, and that they were addressing it. You may, I know you were close to it.
We also
as a
spoke,
business
we
department.
also talked about it at our capital planning, but not in the sense of we got the report, be completely honest, we got the report and we have to do these things. There was always a concern about the roof and that, so it didn't really have to do with the asbestos per se. So the report was, like we were required to do, filed at each school and given to the central office by the facilities department. But again, like we talked about that capital planning committee, the conversation was always about replacement of the roof or the new school. A lot of those recommendations in the 2017 report were recommendations, and we were under, I don't want to say the assumption, but
The impression.
the impression that we could thoughtfully plan on addressing things of immediate action versus, you know, like, it doesn't technically say you need to replace those tiles right now. It says at some point, these tiles need to be abated. So,
And the thought process was after you patch the roof, you would replace the tiles, not before, which I think is pretty logical. It's kind of how I would deal.
That's how it's written in the AHERA report?
No, that's just how I would interpret it. I mean, I think that, you know, they can say that we should replace the tiles, and that's fine, that's a great recommendation, but I think would we want to just logically, and I don't do a lot of building, I'm not going to want to replace the tiles if it's just going to keep leaking. So I think from my standpoint, I would have thought of it in the order that it was suggested. So we're going, you know, as you know, we're going for $100,000 at town meeting. If none of this had come to become such a concern, we would have gotten that $100,000 and then most likely budgeted for ceiling tiles. You know, like, I just feel like that's the normal order of operations, and now we're actually doing it we almost did it in reverse. We won't get the ceiling tiles until the summer, which is nice, assuming it passes at town meeting.
So let me go back to my question. Who received this report? Who got a copy of this report? Do we know that?
Who stamps it?
Aaron's here. I know Aaron and Tim worked together, and Tim was the designated person at the time.
Okay.
The assistant facilities director is the designated person at the time.
Correct.
To handle those recommendations. So Aaron can speak to who actually received it, whether it was he or Tim.
So I do want to turn attention to Aaron, but are you saying that no one in the schools
Nope,
received
we
this
received
report?
it. We
Okay.
received the report.
Yeah.
Because they're required to give it to us. So
And they
yes,
put it in the buildings.
they're placed in a building in an Ahara binder.
Okay. So you get a copy of the report, and you have to, there's a bunch of things that you have to do based on that report in terms of markings of where asbestos is, and don't do work on this without the proper training. There's reports and annual notifications that have got to go out and so forth. I understand that. But in terms of the recommendations itself, who reads that and says, look at these recommendations, we've got some work to do?
I would say in other districts, it would be their facilities manager that does that.
Yeah.
We currently do not have a facilities manager on the school department side, so we do rely on the town's facilities department. But
I would say what we've learned from this process is that we do not have a solid MOU between the town and the schools to handle facilities. I think that we have read through all the documents, and we have an agreement with who is hiring facilities and who would review facilities, but when you read the small agreement written into the custodian's contract, it doesn't cover anything about who is, I think, ultimately, that's how I read it, and I'm not a lawyer, who is ultimately responsible. So we have a summer project with Town Hall to create and bring to the school committee and the Board of Selectmen an actual MOU, so we will have people who are actually understanding the responsibilities. So I don't think, in fairness, I have anyone to blame on this one personally. I think what we didn't have is someone whose job it was to receive said report and act on it, or bring it to the right people to act on, whoever those people might be. So we need to definitely identify that.
So-
Would it be fair to say that primary responsibility to prioritize the actions and recommendations is on the school's part, not on the town's part?
Yeah, this is how I would look at it, yeah.
And I agree with everything you said
Yeah.
about needing to have, I mean, I think Beth said it Beth said it at one of the last meetings, that
Right.
there needs to be a little bit more institutional learning that comes out of this, even though
Oh,
faces
absolutely.
and names will change.
Right.
In order to make sure that this doesn't fall through a crack, which
Right.
it absolutely did.
I mean, I don't know if this is just one, I think this is just my opinion at this point, but I look at facilities as sort of our eyes on the ground, and they can bring us information.
Yes.
But if it comes to funding things, generally that's on the school committee's responsibility, unless it's really day-to-day stuff, which can
Yeah.
fall under the superintendent or building principal, so.
I would see the DPW and the facilities group on the town side responding to requests and priorities
Right.
given
so
by the
that-
school committee.
So I think that that's what
So if I could just interject.
Yeah, sure.
So in the AHERA report, there are two roles that are identified, the designated person and the local education agency. Designated person, we know who that is, that's Tim. The local education agency is,
Superintendent?
Superintendent, school department.
so the term local education agency means a public board of education or other public authority legally constituted within a state for administrative control, direction of, to perform service of public elementary schools, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Public Board of Education. So when this report comes in, okay, someone, somewhere has got to look at it and say, here's what we need to do. The designated person has a very clear role, which is to make sure that the work that gets done is done in accordance with the regulations. That's what the designated person does. They go through special training in order to make sure that whatever work is ordered gets done. But it's on the local education agency
Absolutely.
to prioritize that, okay? And so when a report comes in, you guys are gonna have to read this and say, here's a set of recommendations, and here's what's gonna happen if we, we don't. And these recommendations, I mean, we keep bantering those about as if they're, sort of voluntary to do, but there's a timeline associated with that on some level.
So I will say, from what our consultant has said at the previous meetings or whatever, is that they're recommendations, not requirements. So although that there is a timeline on them, they still are recommendations, and he said specifically at one meeting that they set those timelines to help us within our budgeting, to give us some oomph behind our budgeting for these types of repairs.
So
But
this
I-
person is who? Is this the
From
the-
UEC.
The designer?
Amar from UEC.
Consultant, the environmental consultant.
Okay, so the environmental consultant, so there's another role which is the designer, I think is what it's called. Project designer has to be accredited. I'm looking at you, Aaron, I'm just, okay. And so is that what you're talking about, is that your project designer said that
He
these
said it
are?
in a public meeting.
Okay.
With, I mean, do you-
Go ahead, Aaron.
But in this case, it's the same company.
I'm sorry?
Those are separate roles, but in this case, it's the same company.
Yeah,
Project designer is involved with the design of the project renovation, whereas UBC provides the guidance, comes in and does the 3-year annual inspection of the facility. It has to be done by a licensed asbestos inspector.
and that consultant works with the town on multiple things, I would say, right? Or is this the only thing?
Just on schools, the AIR program is specific to all the school facilities.
so I understand that, so I guess from what I'm reading, and please tell me if I'm wrong here, I mean, I could be, this, I freely admit that this is recent reading on my part, but my understanding is the project designer, the designated person, these roles that are talked about in the HERA regulations are people who are trained to sit there and say, how you're doing it is in accordance with the regulations. But it is up to the local education agency to sit there and say, here's what we have to do, here's when we're going to do it, and here are the funds that we're going to do it or go out and secure that. Is that correct? I'm looking at you, Dr. Jardy, so.
Well, the environmental consultant, though, advises the town and the LEA as to what needs to get done. And that was the point that was made at the last meeting. What he said was we did what we thought was right to do based on those recommendations and the amount of things to do.
So,
I think we have to note too, that out of that 2017 report, there were things that we did address. Maybe not all of them, but there were things that we did prioritize and address within that. And that was between the facilities department and the school department assessing.
Based on the environmental consultant's advice.
Right.
When the town is hired to give us this advice.
So when I went through section 5, it says resources required to complete the response action. It lists out old wing, 1988 wing, and gives a whole bunch of amounts that amount up to in excess of $350,000. So who knows about that $350,000 that needs to be spent in order to do this? And I mean, is that something that was brought to us back in 2017?
I don't believe so.
No.
I know you want to speak too, just briefly. I think the answer that the independent consultant is, going to give us guidance, is like saying the MSBA has recommended we do a new school, whether we can afford to or not. Bear with me on the analogy. I realize it's a big stretch. However, I think what we can state is that there needs to be in Maynard, in the school district, somebody who is going to, take in all that information and then create a plan with the rest of us who have to figure out how to pay for it. So that's, not that the guidance can't come from them, but they can't determine all the things that we know internally about when can we do this, what's the, where is it in the priority list of other things. And that, I think, still is a dialogue we all look back and say we should have had.
Yeah.
Fair enough?
Yeah.
Can I just clarify, the environmental consultant we're referring to here, is someone different than who wrote the O'Hara report? Is that correct?
Same person?
Same. So the people who wrote that report are the ones giving us the advice that it's just recommendations? And they're like certified experts in asbestos law and all this stuff. Can I continue with the question? Okay. Given this and, to my mind, reading the state fine assessment letters, the state seems to rely on the idea of, we had notice of all of this and should have acted. Any response from the state to us saying it's just, wait, these were recommendations, not requirements? Any interplay there, any more to know about that?
Do you want to speak to the appeal process?
Yeah, it's in appeal now, so it probably wouldn't be appropriate for us to talk about it right now. However, we do believe that we're going to find out the results of the appeal very soon, and I think that will speak volumes as to the question you have. It's just that right now, I would not want to
Fair enough.
breach the appeal process, but we, at the town and the schools, both appealed the citations to the town and the citations to the school. And we're still in the process, but I think you'll learn more soon about that.
So I guess as I look at this, I appreciate your all's candor on sort of the fact that you were left with certain impressions and so forth. Having said, and it is a daunting report to get through, but having said that, I think, you know, just from a layman's perspective, I was able to get through it and see that, you know, the LEA must select appropriate response actions. And, you know, that you're supposed to lay that out with the assessment of the and recommendations of the management planner. And so I guess, you know, I'm just sort of left with this idea that in the future, when we get reports like this, you know, this is again what I talked to my fellow board members about, committee members about last week, is when something like this comes in that has these kind of prices on it, it's got to be something that's a larger conversation within the community. Just personal opinion.
As Don said, I think
Okay.
we've all learned,
Yeah.
a lot of it's just that we've learned a lot more about this now. And we're working with the regulatory agencies to make sure everything is done correctly moving forward.
Although, learning about asbestos and the process there, I think Ken's question kind of begs the question, are there other types of things not related to asbestos that, you know, either on the town side or on the school side, should be part of a broader conversation?
Definitely.
You know, off the top of my head, you know, did we have some report on our special ed practices?
Right.
Do we have some report on, you know, some town discrimination issue, on handicapped access that, you know, has this potential liability out there, and we're not fully factoring it in and addressing it? So,
No, I think that's a great point.
It's limited to this.
No, that's a great point.
And I think Don mentioned, as working together, the town and the schools on an MOU will solve that problem.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I'm a manager first, you know, so if we don't have an MOU that says exactly what everyone is exactly responsible for and how we all interpret it, then it's really difficult to enforce. So I think that it's no one's fault, but I think that there was confusion on who was in charge of an O'Hara report, and that's my honest assessment based on everyone I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot of people. So my focus is moving forward and making sure that we all know who is exactly responsible and what they're responsible for, and holding them accountable. And I wish we weren't in this position to be learning that this is important now. But luckily there were no health hazards found, so that makes me feel better. But this was certainly a wake-up call in terms of management practices and just making sure that we have this spelled out,
So when we come to this MOU, it needs to take into account the regulatory roles that are laid out there for the designated person.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're not going to make it up, yeah.
And the LEA, because the LEA has certain regulatory requirements, which has to do with
Right.
taking in the report, determining actions with the assistance of the planner, but the
Right.
planner is not the one who's responsible for that, it's the LEA.
Right.
And, you know, when, you know, in the state of Massachusetts where the school boards are elected volunteer, you know, boards, I think that's got to fall on the superintendent.
No, I
So-
don't disagree, and I think we just all need to have it spelled out. Like I said, I'd never heard of a report like this before, so that's on me, and I take that full responsibility for that, but we'll have better practices going forward.
And I'll add that, working with the DLS, part of the requirements of the appeal process is for us to put those things in place. And so we've already been working together with the facilities department to make sure whichever role needs to be fulfilled will be fulfilled so that the DLS will feel confident that we are fulfilling those roles. So we are in the process of, and have done much of that work already. So I just hope that gives you some feeling that we're moving in the right direction.
So it does. It does. I guess I'm just saying, you know, I'm also reacting a little bit to this idea of, you know, the facilities manager, we used to have one, we used to split one, then we didn't have one, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, there's somebody in the school system who really is responsible for making sure that reports that come in like this get addressed, okay? And it's not the volunteer board, all right? It's the school administration. And in the absence of a facility manager, just one person's opinion, in the absence of a facility manager, there's still someone at the school who has that responsibility. Okay, number 9, any other questions on 8 on the 27th? Okay, so what steps have been, and then we've already talked about this, I guess, a little bit, what steps have been or will be taken to reduce the risk of such disruptions in the future? So you've already talked about the MOU. Are there other things that,
We're also launching software to track maintenance requests, so that was already planned to happen. It's got an odd name, it's called School Dude, but Michelle and facilities were already planning to roll that out in September after training over the summer. So now teachers and staff members will be able to log their requests online, which will be great for us to be able to get some data off of and follow up and make sure that things are happening that are reported. I think the old method in Maynard was just sort of, you would mention it to someone, and that's probably not the best way to get your concerns addressed. And that's not a criticism of everyone, it's just I'm glad to see us move into the 20th.
so this software
21st
for the maintenance request, is this something that's just for the schools, or is this integrated with?
I think it's the whole, I think we're the last piece, right? Like, wasn't the whole town on it?
Is this something that's integrated with the town's maintenance?
I use a separate system at DPW.
So we had purchased School Dude many years ago. It just wasn't being used to its full capability. I started using it as a facilities rental because it has multiple aspects to the software platform. So there's FS Direct, which is facility rentals, which we use right now for anything that has to do with renting our facility. There's another piece which is Maintenance Direct, which will allow teachers to, or staff, all staff, not just teachers, but all staff to put in maintenance requests. It will actually allow them to see their request through the entire process. So when they submit it, when it's completed, you know, comments from the work that was done on it, so they have a full idea of, you know, what went into it. The other benefit to us is for budgetary reasons. It also gives us kind of like a, not kind of, it gives us an idea of how much each maintenance request cost us, from labor to, depending on how deep we do it, from labor to, you know, expense costs. The other piece of it is it also helps you, it's, there's like a analysis piece of it that helps us determine like the lifespan of certain things, you know, like, are we going to continue dumping money into a boiler that we've already spent so much money on, or is it more, is it better for us just to replace it at this point, like where the useful lifespan of equipment and parts of our facilities are. It also has another piece, which is a preventative maintenance piece, which is a reoccurring kind of work order system for facilities that tells them, okay, your filters are due to be replaced, and it also helps us keep track that those things have been done.
So you're saying all those elements will be enabled?
All of those, so we are going for training in, I think, 1 month from
Okay.
now for that piece of it. So we are hoping that it will be implemented, well, our plan is 100% for it to be implemented by September.
Okay.
So my impression is that the facilities manager. whoever
He's coming.
can
He's going to the
access this
training.
tool,
Yeah,
even if
all,
it's separate
so,
from DPW.
he actually already has access to it. We do it between, I'm the only one that can kind of submit work orders through it right at this moment, but, we do it kind of as test work orders or, just getting used to the software before we train our custodians on it. We have invested in iPads for our custodians in each of the building, not for each one of them, but an iPad for each of them because it's a mobile and it's an app, so they can, take it to room 204 and log in when they start, log in when they end, write any commentary they want, and it's almost that instant information
It's
source.
about the only time it gets to be accurate, right?
Yeah,
Days
like,
go by, yeah.
right when it happens,
Yep.
yeah. So,
Okay,
Sorry, one more question.
Yeah.
Just the primary doer of
Mm-hmm.
the repairs are the custodians?
in the
That's
facilities department, yes.
And the facilities.
Yep.
all right, the next couple questions I think we've already touched on, so this may be just a matter of adding anything, so, that we haven't already talked about. So what maintenance, lack of maintenance, other steps or omissions might have contributed to the situation? If there were such omissions, what factors contributed to them? What expenses associated with the current work? For example, the loss of curriculum and other teaching materials might have been avoided had these omissions been addressed in a more timely manner. So you already talked about the cost of the loss of the curriculum material, and that's been on, that's on your spreadsheet. Are there other things, other costs associated that if we'd done this, maybe, as Bob said a couple of years ago when we were sitting here, talking about the replacing the roof, if we had done this in more at that time, are there other things that we might have avoided cost-wise?
I don't think so.
Okay. Any other steps other than the ones we've talked about that maybe were either things that we did or things that we omitted doing that contributed to this?
I feel like we've covered quite a bit, but I'm happy
Yeah.
to take more questions if there are more.
We already talked about the fines, and you already gave an update on those fines. So is there anything else on that? Okay. The next question is, what's the long-term plan for the Green Meadow School building? Have you guys taken a look at different options relative to roof repair, replacement? What have you investigated? What are the pros and cons of the things that you've looked at and associated cost, timelines, lifespan, and so forth?
So,
I'd say,
Quite a question.
other than looking into the MSBA process to see if we get even accepted at some point for the timeline, one thing I don't know if we've talked about this tonight, but we're starting a Green Meadow Future Committee. And I would hope that this group, there's a lot of great people who want to be a part of that group, can look at this sort of similar to the precursor to the high school project. So we've been mostly in triage mode, dealing with getting the school back up and running and trying to get the classrooms as functional as possible. So other than what has been done to look at this last year, which would be looking at a roof option through MSBA or looking at a full school through the MSBA, or our current plan where we throw a little bit of money at it every year. I'm actually really hopeful that the Green Meadow Future Committee could help us out with this and do some research and gathering some things, so.
When you did the MSBA, were you talking about a school replacement, complete replacement?
The last one and
I'm sorry, what?
yes, the last application.
Last year?
Last year's application, and we are looking to submit another application this year.
So when you replace the school, are you replacing it in a different location?
I'm sure you'll recall, the MSBA will help us determining the location, the size, the kids, the population, the the grades. So we don't know yet. right?
The initial step is to decide whether it's an accelerated repair, MSBA application, or core application. The accelerated repair, Aaron, I believe that deadline has already passed, correct? So right now, we're working on the core application, but the application really is demonstrating the need for MSBA and demonstrating that the Board of Selectmen and the school committee philosophically agree with the concept of going to the MSBA and getting a letter of support from them. And so that's what we're doing right now, because that's the direction we thought we should be going in. It doesn't mean that we can't look at other options, and it's a good thing that we started this committee who can, have talented people look at it from different vantage points, and we're open to that.
So the core replaces the building as a whole. And most of this focus has been on a single wing.
That's right. Yep.
So parts of the schools are different age, right?
Correct.
And you want to replace, are the other parts of the school also having similar issues?
So Aaron's more familiar with the different parts. There's one that was built in 1956, one in the 70s, one in the 80s. What I will say is the design of the building, even the 80s design, when we went through the walkthrough with MSBA last year, they were astonished that a building would be built with a hill in it, especially when you have kids on wheelchairs. And, the design, even in 1988, was not ideal. And some of the input we got was, even your newest section isn't really designed well. And that's probably why it made sense to look at a core replacement. But I'll let Aaron speak to the details, because is that accurate, Aaron?
So the core program, it gives options. So you can either do a major renovation or replacement or new construction. And that's something that's determined later on during the feasibility phase of the project. So the first step would be to apply for the project, an MSBA application, you state the need. The need's not just facility need, it's also district-wide need. So a big portion of it is academics and education for the school district as a whole. If it makes it past the first round, which the application did last year, they'll come out and do a feasibility study to determine if it meets the next level criteria. And then from there, if it's selected, they assist with the really in-depth feasibility study, what needs to happen. I haven't been involved in that process, so I can't speak beyond that. But it's a multi-year, multi-phase process where they really take it one step at a time. And I think applying for an MSB application doesn't commit the town to any expenditures or funds. It just simply states that there's a need.
Well, so I guess, from a practical perspective, so the way we did the high school was to build the new high school behind the old one and then tear the old one down. And so we knew we were going to tear the old one down because we knew that building was not a building we could keep. Too much would go into it to put it to some other use, and it was out in the middle of the front yard of the school, et cetera, et cetera. So we knew from the beginning it was going to be that way. If we're going to do that with the elementary school, either to keep the old elementary school and repurpose this, some other purpose within the town, you're not going to tear down the old school. You're going to have to build a new school somewhere else. And so I guess, if we're going to build a new school, then we'll have to make a decision at some point of whether we're going to keep the old school or not, because you're no longer talking about tearing down the 1956 wing and just replacing one wing. You said yourself that the rest of the building is, you've gotten feedback that it's not a good design. Okay, so maybe not a good design for a building, but maybe a good design for some other municipal use. Okay. And if that's the case, then we ought to be, making a decision about that, because then it makes a heck of a lot more sense to do a roof repair, because that's a building that's going to stay around for a while. Okay? So, yeah.
And one more point is that the roof on the oldest section, the 1955 section, has already failed. It's obvious, but the rest of the roof on the 1988 section is end of life. So, the 1.9 million is a quote that we received 2 years ago to replace the roof on the entire building. And that's what.
All the wings.
Flat roof in this.
So is that a project that you could do in phases so that you could do the oldest one first? Okay. Do we have an estimate on what that would cost if it was just the old wing?
So 2 years ago it was 900,000.
Okay. So this is where my thinking is going, is that we're not tearing down the school. We know that the new school's got to go somewhere else. I don't know where we're going to fit it, but it's going to have to go somewhere else, okay? That's where it's going to get built, and then we're going to have that building. And we ought to be deciding now whether that's a building that we'll keep for another municipal use, in which case then we ought to, put money into it, because it's a, I mean, that's part of the assessment to sit there and say, would it be useful for some of the use and the heating system, et cetera, could be done that way. But, just first glance, it seems to me we ought to be looking at. Bob made the case a little while ago that we're gonna have that school for a long time, and I agree with him. And even after we no longer have that school, we've got a new school, we're probably gonna continue to use that building. I just don't see it being the same thing as what happened with the high school.
Sorry, I didn't mean to almost cut you off. I mean, part of what this committee can look at is also repairs. Like, we don't have to assume, like, the MSBA might look at all the money we just put into the old wing and say, we don't want to even see you for 15 years. So I'm not, I don't want to jump the gun and say we're going to get accepted into anything. So I think the Green Meadow Future Committee, which is going to be similar to the high school building committee, just a little bit earlier in the process, in my opinion, we can certainly have them look at all those options and then present to all three boards. I think that's when they can invite people in. I mean, if you remember how Jerry Culbert and Tony, kind of handled the high school building committee, I think we got a lot of really good information out of that. So I think having a group focused on that and looking at all the different iterations, because the building is built as 3 separate wings. We have no idea what the state's opinion is going to be of that building. So I'm hoping that part of their mission will be to look at these different options and come back with estimates. And again, I think this is a town decision. I don't think of this as a school committee decision. We are one part of the 3 boards in town that should look at this, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ken's questions are interesting.
Is that a euphemism?
Well, I guess I'd say I think
Usually
there's a
it's
more
yeah.
fundamental question about the expected lifespan of the Green Meadow. Even Andrew putting it in the plan for 2024, I can't see that that's feasible, and that we're looking at a solid 10 years or so of needing to use the Green Meadow.
That may definitely be the case.
And, the committee can certainly inform that, but, I'd be interested in, I don't think it's here tonight, but maybe some broader conversation, Board of Selectmen or something, about,
Absolutely.
What do we want to do that, no matter what, I can't see that we're doing a new Green Meadow in the next 5 years. It's just, I don't think support is there for it. I don't think the tax base is there for it.
Right.
And if we
competing priorities, if I can just, so I think we need to do that discussion and then go to the mechanics of where do we put the new school or whatever.
Oh, definitely.
Well, so I guess my point, I was just trying to point out the fact we're not going to tear down the old school and put up a new school in its place. Okay, so it's going, the other, new building's going to have to go somewhere else, which means that we will at the end have the old building, and that's all I was trying, I wasn't advocating. And I guess I like the idea of this Green Meadow Futures, to take a look at what the new Green Meadow School should look like. But, I mean, in the interim, we need to be looking actively right now at what we do with the current building.
That is definitely part of it. So it is not the Green Meadow Building Committee. It's the Green Meadow Future Committee. And I think the future is 0 to 10 plus years. And I think having a committee like that that's a variety of stakeholders, we haven't formed the committee. We're going to do that this Thursday. But we have teachers that want to be on the committee. We have community members. We have people from the building field. So I anticipate that being a cross-stakeholder group that can consider the building for the next X amount of years. They will not If they just jump to the idea that we're getting a new building next, they will not be fulfilling their mission, in my personal opinion. We haven't created the mission yet,
Right.
so I want to be careful.
Yeah.
But we're going to discuss on Thursday night, what is the mission of this committee? What are the deliverables of this committee?
Yeah.
Because I've been on committees where you don't have those things set, and it's a nightmare. So we're going to hopefully give them some guidance, and I think this is very helpful tonight to understand that we're all on the same page. We don't know what the future holds. So I'm hoping they can come up with options that they present, and then all the boards weigh in, and then eventually something makes its way to town meeting that's been fully vetted.
Right.
And can I just ask on the MSBA process, is there a possibility that we hurt ourselves if we get ahead of where the town is with MSBA? So if MSBA, if we do the application this spring, they again go to the second round, we do feasibility, and they say, okay, you're on the fast track, you'll have funding in 2023. That means the town needs to come up with 20 million or so by 2023, which I don't think we can do. So is it possible that we're applying too early to MSBA?
Or
That would hurt us if we reject their money?
I mean, the other thing I think I heard at the February meeting was that we had applied for a roof repair MSBA loan request, whatever we call it, and that we had been told that you don't do both, and now we're talking about the core. And maybe to Ken's point, to your point, that's really backwards, especially because I would, since the Board of Selectmen is here, a great deal of them, I would say that doing that, signing that letter, and if they were to come forward and say, yep, you gotta, let's get moving, we do start spending money, just like we did on the fire station. We will be expending money, moving towards something that we have to find a way to afford. And I'd like to have that vetted now before the mission of the Futures Committee gets too far afield. Because I think, me personally, you can tell I've got a bias that we've got the fire station, we're struggling with that, we're talking about this, and whether it was on that list in October 2018 or not, and I realize it was, I've projected the numbers. I don't see where we come up with the money to do it. So why rush forward to the MSBA with the core before we fix the roof, which $2 million is still going to be hard to afford, right? And have a plan for when we think we could fund, a building, a full building, or any other option, and map that out, because we don't need the MSBA to tell us that, and we don't need the environmental consultant or anybody else to tell us how to do those kinds of plans. But we haven't done them yet, and I think that's a problem.
Anything else?
Can I just, any thoughts on the idea, what happens if MSBA funds us and we're not ready? We can't come up with our half?
I know Aaron would work with them, I'm not certain.
No.
Yeah,
Okay.
we have to look into that.
Okay.
So I think that gets to question 13. We probably already talked on that, which is how are these long-term plans integrated with the work that's been done as being performed in the near term? I think we've laid out adequately the point here that there needs to be an integrated view on that. The last question, I think we've also talked around somewhat, number 14 being, what interactions has the Maynard Public Schools, School Committee, other town governmental bodies had with MSBA or other government agencies relative to state funding? So is the MSBA requests, are those the only statements of interest, are those the only ones that we have, the only outreach that we've done to the Commonwealth for funding? Or is there anything, okay?
No,
Oh,
spoken to Kate several times.
oh, sorry, that's true. We have been keeping Kate updated.
Um,
I don't believe she has,
But she's the only person that's gonna advocate for the community in the State House.
right.
So,
No,
yeah.
that's a good
Kate-
point.
Kate has got the information, Kate understands
Yeah.
the need, and so Kate has, made overtures and whatnot at the State
No.
House to date, so, that's the only other alternative other than MSBA.
Okay,
So she's made those, initial inquiries.
okay.
I just want to state that the MSBA core program isn't just for a replacement of the building. It's for, they do the feasibility study to determine if you're going to repair the building, if an addition is possible, or if you need a core new full building. So there is, so the applying for the MSBA and being put into the feasibility study will give us a better idea on if we need to go for a full school
Right.
whether or not it can be in the same area like the high school was or not, as well as if we needed to add an addition, or if we needed to repair the building.
So I agree with you, except for the first blush reaction of the MSBA group that toured the building was that it really needed to be replaced in its entirety.
They told us to apply for the core program,
Right.
not the accelerated repair for just the roof.
Right.
They wanted us to be able to do the feasibility study for the entire building.
Understood.
So then they could make a recommendation if there needed to be an addition, if it needed to be repaired, or if it needed a complete
So
replacement.
maybe it was overstated that their recommendation was that we need a new building. It was probably overstated.
Okay?
I think Michelle is much more accurate because
Yeah, I appreciate that, and that is a nuance that makes a difference. However, we could still be in the position that Peter outlined, that they say go forward, let's move ahead in 2024, or whatever it was.
What's the funding split if we do MSBA?
I believe it's
40-60.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
It's usually 40-60.
60 mass,
Yeah.
40 us. That's what it was for the high school.
Yep.
Yep.
Roughly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the other thing, Peter, if I remember correctly, when we went for the high school, the MSBA money was subject to it
Right.
passing at
Passing.
the town hall. So they don't, it's not like a definite, we're giving you the money and you have to come up with, everything is subject to
Right,
the
right.
town.
Yes, but
approving
there's
it.
still a process where the MSBA,
Sure.
approves the school, and if the local partner rejects the money, I
Absolutely.
assume that weighs on future decisions.
The way they described it was you get back to the end of the line.
Right, exactly.
right.
Yeah,
Which
but I look
right
at it
now-
as, they're also, they
Gotta
are
find the
so
money.
far into this process, and they've helped so many towns with different buildings, that we're in a much better place than we were when we went for the high school. For the high school, we were the pilot program, and, we didn't get 100% of what we wanted, we got 90%, which was wonderful. But this time, they are so much more, they have so much more expertise that they can tell us, maybe we want to put an addition on the Fowler, maybe we want to put an addition on the high school, all different kinds of scenarios that
Correct.
I'm not smart enough to sit here and talk about,
Yeah.
but,
Correct.
so I think to put our heads in the sand and not at least make the effort, we're doing ourselves a disservice.
So let me respond to that, because I don't think I'm putting my head in the sand, and I'll explain why. What we're talking about, no matter what scenario we pick, unless it's just repairing the roof, we're talking about, let's call it 10 to maybe $40 million, right? It could be. So there's a wide range. But that $10 million we can't put our hands on for the fire station right now, right? Everybody, we're having a really hard time with that. So there's a context for how we're going to pay for any of these big projects, right? Whether we get 60% of it paid for by the state or not, that we need to grapple with and plan for. And it isn't, I think I understand your point about head in the sand, but just saying move ahead and hope that we can get that money, knowing what we're projecting for revenues to pay the principal and interest on that bond, is also a little bit, hopeful, and maybe too hopeful. So, so where do you start? It's a great point. I think we've opened up a conversation, but the affordability of that in the near term has to be grappled with.
And that's where the townspeople come in. That's where a
Right.
vote to say,
what I'm saying.
we're willing to put up the money, just like we did with the high school. I mean, everybody's taxes went up and, but for us to sit here.
All right.
I do think we have to grapple with real numbers projected into the future, not just say I'll pay more taxes, because, there are real realities here that isn't enough to be able to pay for something like this. Not in a couple of other projects that we desperately need as well.
Okay. So, Peter, you started to say something?
I was just gonna note, I think there is something, I've been educated a little maybe on the MSBA core program, that to the degree that it brings expertise and gives us, additional options, then maybe it does make some more sense. And I assume MSBA would be sensitive to local political realities and, would delay their funding a couple of years if we said, look, you should delay it a couple of years so we can get the support for it.
Well, so just to advocate on what Bob's saying, I mean, the point is that does not exist on our plan right now, not in any realistic way.
I know.
And so that's
That's
there's
the only
problem.
point, is a plan for where those funds will come from. I hope you get that point.
Yeah.
I'm not against going after a replacement for Green Meadow School or a significant repair.
It all takes
But-
planning.
I'm playing the lottery
Yeah, not just
furiously with
hopeful planning,
the
but
intent of funding the
Financial plan.
Ken Estabrook Memorial High School, so
Nice.
there you go. If I win, if I win the big one, that's where it's going. All right, last question is, are there any other things that we haven't talked about that the Finance Committee should know about, should be aware of as we move forward and make our decisions on our recommendations relative to the funding of this? Is there anything that's not brought into this conversation?
No, just that it has brought up good points. Mary Branley has certainly brought up some great points that we should have these types of committees for all three buildings because Fowler's, in the high school. So we should be proactive and not wait for signs of the end. So we're going to try to be more proactive and seat more committees. So I'm hoping that helps.
Any other questions before we close this part and move on to the?
Nope.
All right, so I want to get some more water, so let's take a 5-minute recess to stretch, and then we'll start on with the budget part.
Sounds good.
But yeah, she's great.
So thank you very much, by the way, I thought in an hour and 45 minutes, we did a great job of covering a lot of ground here. So I think this was helpful. There are some things, obviously, that we want to see in writing, and we appreciate that, but it was a good hour and 45 minutes. So we're going to turn our attention now to the fiscal year 2020 budget. And so just for context again, we've had a lot of discussions with the town budget subcommittee, culminating, well, I guess not culminating, but major milestone of that was the February 9th joint budget review at the library. And then that's sort of where we had some initial discussions for the first time as all three boards, but in the context, obviously, of the town budget subcommittee. And then we've continued those discussions on our independent boards. And I know we've also had continued discussions within the town budget subcommittee. So I'm saying that because we've already had a lot of conversations. We sort of know where we are. And so I guess the main question is, given where we knew we were and given the fact that you had some, I guess, final numbers in the sense of as far as we are, then there's some number of cuts that you all are taking a look at on the expense side. And so when we start our conversation there, and if I don't know if you have a list or something to discuss.
What I can read it off to you. It's going to be 4 line items. It's going to be presented to the school committee for the first time this Thursday, but I'm happy to read them out loud now because all of the staff that would be impacted have been spoken with. And just for anyone who hasn't followed the process, we are in a $100,000 deficit, which could sound terrible, but actually if you've been doing this for years, you realize it's probably the best year we've had in a long time. We've had years where we've had a $600,000 deficit. So I just want to thank that town administrator and the Board of Selectmen and everyone on the Finance Committee. We've had some great discussions this year, and we were able to close the gap. And while the $100,000, will still hurt, it will hurt a lot less than the prior years. So I'm going to give you 4 line items, and then I'm happy. I thought I had sent this already, so I apologize. I'll send it tonight.
Thank you.
The first one. It's going to be under special education consultants, and there's a proposal to increase the internal occupational therapist positions to a 0.7, and that will reduce outside consulting costs, and that's around occupational therapy for special education students. That will save $22,911.
So same services, just bringing it internal?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that's bringing in a .7?
Raising it to, is that how I should phrase
No,
it?
it's raising from a .5 to a .7?
0.5 to a 0.7 internal employee, and that'll allow us to cut back on some of the outside folks we're bringing in that are more expensive.
And is there a difference on the town side because of benefits and stuff?
There will
think
not
so,
be.
'cause it's
There could
going
be,
from a
but there won't.
0.5 to a
From our
0.7.
understanding is there won't be.
Okay.
So that number is 22,911 in savings. We always looking at if we have an extra classroom, if we can rent it out, not just to anyone, but for the Case Collaborative Program. So we'll be renting out 2 additional classrooms from Fowler. So that's a revenue producer, and that'll bring in an additional $15,000 total.
How many rooms do they rent out now?
Bob?
4.
So this would go from 4 to 6?
But it's not all 4 at Fowler, though. One's
Oh, 4 through the district.
4 through the district currently, and then, yeah.
So it would technically bring 4 to Fowler and 2 to the high school. But the increase is at Fowler.
Yep, so we'll be renting 2 additional classrooms from Fowler. And we do have that space because we considered briefly moving people over to Fowler if we had had some different results with the Green Meadow testing. So line item number 3, special education paraprofessional, not filling an unfilled position from this year. That'll save $16,000. And the final light item is we will move the Fowler strings and chorus program to an after-school program. And that will save $50,000, and we'll reorganize the music department.
And again, that'll be done through attrition, so
That is
the
through
good news
attrition.
here is that even though some people may have to shift their responsibilities, we're not laying off staff in order to do this.
Exactly.
So the first one, you said it was the same services. That's the special education consultants. The classrooms you said you had available. The third one, in terms of impacts, what was the paraprofessional position you're not filling?
It's a special education para,
Yeah.
and it's unfilled now, and we will continue to leave it unfilled.
And what's the impact of that?
16,000.
No,
So the-
I'm sorry.
Oh.
The non-financial impact.
So I believe that there was a need at the beginning of the year for that position, but as you know, people sometimes move in and move out, our students. And this year, we've been able to actually unfill 2 positions, but we want to be realistic that people do move back in. So we thought it was conservative to say that we can, wait and see on the second one, but that we can reduce by 1.
Okay.
And our staffing in that area has been pretty stable for the last couple of years. For a long time, it had gone up significantly, but in that particular area, it's been relatively stable.
The Fowler course and strings, moving that to an after-school program, what's the impact of that?
So it's a scheduling matter, and as a result of the contract negotiations last year, we created new schedules that added a lot of those special programs. After analyzing the scheduling this year, we believe that we don't need those programs during the day, and some of those programs, for strings specifically, can be done in the after-school program, and we can save those monies.
Okay. All right. So those are the 4 cuts that you all are recommending to balance the budget.
That's what we'll recommend to the school committee on Thursday.
Okay. What questions?
I have some more general questions about the budget.
I'm sorry, that's not on my list.
Okay, so first, I'm working from the February presentation, where your budget totaled, I don't know, substantially more than the town offered, if you will. And so I know there are cuts that have to be made to that, but that's the detail I have that I'm working from. So I mean, my first thing was just to go and look at cuts, that were already built into that budget. And I couldn't help notice, so overall, the high school, so out of cuts of more than 50,000, 4 out of 5 of those were at the high school. High school teachers down by 126, high school paraprofessionals by 55, librarian by 59, nursing by 123, and a 24K cut to guidance, so that the overall high school funding is down 93,000 this year. Is that, what's the thinking there? Is that the strategy?
Where are you looking?
You're not, okay, you're not getting.
I have the February presentation on my laptop.
Yep.
I'm just wondering,
Slide, maybe?
So if you go to the high school, classroom teachers go from 2065 down to 1939.
do you want a certain slide, or?
I'm looking at
Oh,
the
the
budget
book. All right, hold on. Hold on.
Yeah.
We'll bring Michelle up. Michelle makes the book.
So classroom teachers at the Maynard High School is what I'm,
Oh, thank you, Joe.
so the line 2305.
All right. All right. Yeah. Why don't you switch with me, because I think you'll be able to speak to the program changes.
So, I'm sorry, where are you saying, 2305
Yeah, so
classroom
the classroom
teachers?
teachers.
Oh, so you're looking from previous year to this year?
Yeah.
So I think I noted, when I gave this budget book or somewhere within it, there were some shifts in what people were designated under, 2305 versus 2310. This is a DOE function code, so it's not necessarily, it's a difference in moving people within where they were reported before and where they correctly need to be reported now.
Okay, so that's the teachers?
Yeah,
Or is that-
there's probably multiple positions. There's also the technology. I think you'll notice it within technology as well.
Didn't see that.
Okay, well,
But
there,
so
If you- I
within this
think-
high school section,
yep.
there is still the overall funding for the high school goes down.
So I think that has to do with probably the nursing piece.
Also the technology.
So yeah,
We moved a technology teacher to the elementary school. So that would reduce the funding at the high school and increase it at the middle school. I'm trying to.
We had shifted guidance as well.
Oh, guidance was what I
yeah.
was thinking,
Yeah.
yes,
We brought it down to the lower levels. There were needs at the lower levels. So from a programmatic standpoint, as far as the engineering program, we were seeing reduced numbers of students choosing that program. We moved that down to Fowler. So that's one teaching position that would explain why it went down, so that the teacher could then get the excitement up so we can improve our engineering program at the high school. So that was one shift. Another shift was the guidance was shifted across the district because there was a need for more guidance at the lower levels due to social emotional needs. Green Meadow for a long time had the lowest count of guidance counselors compared to the other buildings. So a lot of these resources were shifted programmatically for good reasons. But then there are
Part of which would be that we think we can afford to lose it at the high school. I know it's not an easy, nobody wants to lose it.
Nobody wants to lose anything at that, yeah.
Okay, so there is some shift away from the high school of some of this stuff.
The hope was to have some of it be temporary, because with the technology person, by bringing the person down to the middle school, what you're not seeing here, you're seeing the cuts that we had to make, but one of the things we were hoping to be able to do, that I think we brought up at the February meeting, was to be able to bring a technology teacher back to the high school. So then have one in the middle and in the high school. Same with like the OASIS program for the students that have the social emotional situations. You know, we created that program this year in the high school, and we were hoping to add to it at the middle school, which is really where you really should be grabbing those kids. So.
And the other thing is the high school class sizes are smaller than the other two buildings. So if we have to shift resources down, it makes sense that we're being more efficient at the high school. So we're constantly, every year, and the school community, knows, we look at the class size numbers, and we want to make sure that we're maximizing what we can, but due to the nature of the high school, because of the elective courses, some of the classes do run small, and so in order to provide the students, the full spectrum of courses that we possibly can, sometimes we run them a little lower, but in the case of the engineering program, it was disappointing that the numbers were coming in like they had in the past. In contrary, we actually had developed a great program in computer science at the middle level that we expanded to the high school, because those numbers were coming in strong, because once you get the kids excited at the middle level, then you can get them excited at the high school. So there's shifting back and forth based on student enrollment for classes and based on student interest.
Okay. And there's a fairly decent cut in the paraprofessionals at the high school?
We have much less paraprofessionals at the high school.
And that's that's also need-based too.
Right.
Again,
That's just based on the student
That's a moving
population.
target.
That's,
right.
yeah, it all depends on, students who have certain needs and whether we need to use paraprofessionals to support them or whether there are other things that support their needs.
Okay. Okay. Keep going, or, okay. Let's see. There was a large increase in FY19 in out-of-district tuition. Is there a corresponding, increase in FY20 in, I'm sorry, I can't get my chapter straight. What's the reimbursement for special ed?
Circuit breaker.
Circuit breaker, right. Is there an increase in circuit breaker that I think we should be getting in FY20? And then are the out-of-district tuition numbers net of circuit breaker money?
Yes.
Okay, so,
like, a circuit breaker, like we've explained a couple of times, is like a pretty in-depth calculation. It also depends on what the state reimburses at, which is set each year. So, depending on what the state comes in as their circuit breaker reimbursement, how they're going to fund it, depends on how much we actually get. There have been years where we're at 68%, 63%. There have been years that we've been at 73% reimbursement. So,
I get that. So the FY18 out-of-district budget was about $1 million. FY19 was 1.8 million. I assume almost all of which fell on the town because there wouldn't be the circuit breaker reimbursement yet. The FY20 budget is 205, so about 200,000 more. So the real increase is a lot more than that because circuit breaker would have gone up substantially also.
yes, I wouldn't say substantially, but yes, it does go up every year based on what you file for the year before. So you receive circuit breaker a year in
But we would have more, we would have 800,000 more qualifying expense, not quite double, but almost double.
right. So last year, we actually qualified for extraordinary relief when it came to circuit breaker. And Mike can speak on this. We
That
received,
comes through this year?
it came in last year. We had to expend it last year as part of our
So
budget.
I think the point you're making, and maybe I'm wrong, but is that we actually had a larger increase in the prior year.
Right.
This year, the increase is smaller, 800,000, this year, 200,000.
Yep.
Your question is, because we had the larger increase last year, hopefully we got a lot more circuit breaker last year, did that help offset the cost of this year's
Right,
increase?
so the 200,000
Yeah.
this year is really.
Smaller
another
compared.
Yeah, so we
800,000 increase.
received, I believe, around a little over 400,000 the previous year. This year, it was estimated at probably around 600,000
To your
that we
point.
used to the budget. So it's,
That's it, really? So
yeah,
That's
that's
the
it.
portion.
100,000 increase only gets you 200,000.
Right,
more.
because they also, the $800,000
Formula.
increase, first of all, it's a formula, and it's
Yep.
based on a million different things.
Yep.
But what they consider extraordinary relief is when you qualify for that, when you've spent 125% more than the previous year. That is why we qualified for it last year.
Oh,
We
so we got
received
some
those
of the
funds
money.
already last year, that we applied to last year's money. I think, yeah, somewhere in that range.
So you still end up getting the same amount, it's
Correct.
just that you get to have it sooner because of
Correct.
the.
You get the, extra
Right.
extraordinary relief,
But then,
basically.
but then it goes, you get less the next year.
You don't get less, we just get the same
back to that
amount
formula.
that
No, that's what I'm saying. So
allocated to the
they
formula.
move the money to
Yes.
the current fiscal year,
Right.
so you're not gonna get it
Correct.
in the subsequent
Right, you don't get it
fiscal year.
twice, unless we qualify again. We are applying again for extraordinary relief.
Okay,
So unless we get it again, yeah.
Okay.
all right. And again, I'm going from the February numbers.
Yep.
And just, a lot of that has to come down, so maybe these increases aren't valid
So-
anymore.
Yeah, so I will explain, so when we present our budget book, this is our
Yeah, no, I get that, that's fine. Yeah.
superintendent's recommended budget.
Yeah.
This isn't the actual
Right.
final say
But it's-
budget, right?
As much detail as I have, so.
Sure. Yeah.
The increases that were over 75,000,
Mm-hmm.
just as a rough thing. And, some of it makes sense, and it's teachers at Green
Yep.
Meadow and Fowler and stuff. A couple of things stuck out, though. An increase in sped medical and therapeutic that goes from 17,000 to 175,000.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still the budget, or still what you're planning to spend, and can you just talk what that was?
Is that the Oasis?
That's the Oasis program that I think we were additionally adding that Oasis program to the Fowler school, so that has to take part of, I believe if you saw in the documents that I sent you, there was a section that talked about the Oasis program, if I sent you the right thing. So in the front of the budget book, you'll see,
Okay, so that's an additional program.
right, so that.
Can I explain the program? So the concept is
I
important.
don't have to have super detail.
Yeah, but it's based on the Bright program out of Brookline. It's designed to actually help students who are out of district come back in, so then you can reduce those out-of-district programs. And we had a couple of students who we could have lost to out of district, and we saw this program would be beneficial to keep them in the school and prevent those out-of-district numbers from growing as well. And so the program serves a small number of students, but a very important number of students who we're either helping back to come back in the district, because the transition isn't always easy. When you go to an out-of-district placement, to come back is very hard for some students, and to prevent students from leaving. And so that's why this is an extraordinary program that actually saved money instantly. By adding that cost, we actually saved the circuit breaker expense, or not the circuit, the special ed out-of-district placement expense that we saw coming during that school year, so it was really a valuable program.
So,
And yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I just want to refer you to this section of the budget book where that talks about probably the questions that you're going to have.
Did I really miss this? I'm sorry.
What page
So-
is that?
That's page 13 in mine, but I won't say that mine's the final copy on it.
We got.
All right, thanks.
Sorry, what page?
So it's page 13 on mine where it has like a chart that shows you, these were things that we were looking to add to our budget. So it talks about the 167,000 for the additional Oasis program at Fowler. It talks about the engineering teacher, which is a $66,000 increase.
But that's at the high school.
A computer science
So there,
teacher.
I confused you. The one program we put in place was at the high school. That money we were asking for to put a similar program in place at the middle school, again, a therapeutic program that would help prevent kids from leaving the district, because some of our students leave at earlier ages as well.
Okay. So Oasis is here, but, the psychological services at Fowler goes from 65,000 to 155,000?
Mhm.
Is that,
That's this right here, Fowler Therapeutic Counselors, Student Services, provides therapeutic services for at-risk students, potentially reduces special education out-of-district expenses.
oh, I thought that was Oasis.
That is
is
Oasis.
Well, there's an Oasis
There's
program
one
at the high school that we
already.
started last,
This was a request to have that same program implemented at the middle school.
So the 55K is part of this? Is that what you're saying?
The
That you were
what?
just talking- You were
He
just
said
talking-
155K,
Oh,
yes,
all right.
that's a piece of it.
Piece of it.
So it's an additional, I can't speak to this this is a recommendation from the special ed department, but the 3 FTE is
It's a teacher, a psychologist, and
And
a
a
paraprofessional.
so they would line up in 3 different lines.
Yeah,
Or actually 2 different lines technically.
Psychological and the
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
in order to create that program, you need those 3 staff members. It's been successful at the high school. We wanted to expand it to the middle school.
I'll give-
Okay.
You weren't on
No,
it? Can I send it?
thanks.
At the high school, psychological services again go from 44 to 132. Is that,
Yeah, that's based on what we're spending, yes.
okay? Yeah, I'm not sure,
So-
I'm just kind of highlighting.
I think
urgent
what-
The big,
pieces.
Yep.
big ticket items.
And wanna just make sure they come up. Specialist teachers at the Fowler School. Go from 514 to 726,000. What's,
That's adding a special, I actually don't have it.
Well,
in
so
front of
as a
me.
result of contract negotiations, we need to add more specialists at the elementary and middle level. And so, part of that scheduling, I believe, is the reason for that.
Which line did you just say?
specialist teachers, 2310 at Fowler.
Yes, so that's what he's talking about, yep.
And that's just, we need,
We had to add per contracts for the year before. We had to add additional services.
Specialist programs to provide the amount of
Planning
common
time.
planning time.
specialist here is sped, not music.
No, in this case, specialists would be music, art, or any of those
Wellness,
elective, we used to
yep.
call them electives when we were, well, at the high
Oh,
school
this
level.
is music and art and stuff?
Music and art and computer
Spanish.
science and foreign language. So that's what specialists are referred to here.
Okay. So we're adding 200,000 of specialists at Fowler? That's,
Where,
at Fowler, we're adding 200,000 of specialist teachers?
between salary
Yeah,
increases and,
new
yep.
positions.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, the positions were already added. This is the true budgeting of what it costs for us to maintain that school at the level that we have provided it the year before. So it may have been under budgeted a previous year.
okay.
Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
I
so.
do,
yeah,
but
So,
I can only go by the difference in the budget.
That you
That's
see.
what I got.
yep,
Yep.
Okay. I think that's, yeah, the rest of it is the teacher stuff, which, although the increases are large,
mhm.
the line items are large too, so,
Mm-hmm.
okay. All right, I won't do it tonight. I have a different set of questions about looking at the DESE information and the sources for some of the money that show up as non-general fund, but maybe I'll send you an email, I don't want to go
Okay.
through that, this take too long, so. Thank you, I'm done.
Okay. So, so a couple of more questions. Are there any near-term plans for evaluating the efficiency and effectiveness of the Maynard Public Schools administrative structure? So, you know, you have the administration set up a certain way, so how do you evaluate that? What steps are going to be taken in this evaluation process? When are you going to do that? Whom? And how would you go about getting various stakeholder perspectives, soliciting those and addressing them in the evaluation process?
So the school committee has actually taken on those questions, and we're continuing to look at them. And we are going to be evaluating them over the course of this budget season, right into the summer, and looking at our staffing levels in administration. We do that annually. And we do receive feedback at the school
staff,
committee meetings from the staff.
Right, parents.
Yep.
What are some of the metrics, I guess, that you look at in terms of efficiency and effectiveness? Obviously, the number of people, the cost, and so forth, but
Right.
on the other side, what are you looking at in terms of effectiveness?
Yeah, we've looked at comparable districts and what they're spending on administrative staff as well. But metrics are really important here because we did go to a different model that really focused on instructional improvement and leadership and operations. And so it's relatively new. It's a new model that we've tried, and we've gotten positive feedback from staff surveys about the curricular support from having this model. So that's something that, is the core of what we do. It's kind of important that the staff feel that they're getting more feedback that they weren't getting as the same quality of evaluations in the past. So being able to provide this model has provided us a metric that shows that staff appreciate that portion of it. Now, again, we've gotten some positive feedback and some negative feedback, but that is one positive feedback we got through staff surveys.
What are the advantages of having two principals in the schools as contrasted with the sort of more traditional model where you have a principal and a assistant principal?
Because the principal can be truly the curriculum instruction and assessment leader. A lot goes on during the course of a school day for a principal and for a principal and an assistant principal. And there are a lot of challenges that will distract you from the core of your work. Leadership and operations is a lot. I can think of the very first day of school when we really wanted parents to feel support, and I was out there with the principal and with the two administrators at the high school waving to the parents, let's start the school year off well. And immediately, one of the teachers came in because they have all the students come into the auditorium and they do a presentation, and the technology wasn't working, so one of the administrators had to run and help the teacher to get the day started properly for the kids. And those sort of things, as much as we want to be out and be visible, oftentimes principals are torn between solving problems in the immediate and doing the long-term positive things like being out there, welcoming the students, welcoming parents. So that's just one example that happened this year where the principals got pulled on two different things, and I was out there waving to parents, even though our intention was for the principals to be out there and providing a welcoming start to the school year. So those are the kind of things that oftentimes, even though it might be in an assistant principal's realm, the principal has to help out, and then they can't focus on those instructional or those community things that they really should be doing. So
are you measuring whether this structure is actually increasing the amount of time that is being spent on curriculum development and evaluation, teacher assessment and stuff like that?
Working with teacher leaders, the fact that we have common planning time now allows the principal of curriculum instruction and assessment to provide more time with the teacher leaders on curriculum leadership. It allows the assistant superintendent to then create the metric of all of them working together and moving in the right direction.
So measuring the number of hours would be one thing, one metric that you're using, presumably that, because you said the problem here is they're getting distracted.
Yeah,
and so if you set this up in order to eliminate the distractions, then I guess one of the questions is it actually eliminating the distractions? Right. Are you finding that they're able to increase the number of hours that they're dedicating to curriculum development?
So we haven't measured it, but now I've taken note of that. Okay. I think that's a good metric. Like I said, right now we've gotten survey and anecdotal evidence that the curriculum portion of the administration in the school has improved. Whether it's through the evaluation process, whether it's through leading teacher leaders and working with them on, curriculum mapping and all the other things that need to get done in a school.
No, I understand that. I guess I'm just saying if you're, so I presume that having two principals might be more expensive than having a principal and a vice principal?
Well, so
assistant principal?
The model was originally designed so that it wouldn't be more expensive. It would be a 10-month principle of leadership and operations and a 12-month principle, which is a way that's oftentimes a 12-month curriculum instruction and assessment principle. Because oftentimes districts will have a 10-month or assistant principal. Now, some districts have 12 months for both. And so originally it was designed so that we would be, it would be less expensive. Now, this summer, because the summer just before this school year, because we had the contract negotiations and the changes to schedule, some of the 10-month employees were given extra time. So this particular year, the cost went up. However, the goal is to have a 10-month and a 12-month principle so that you can offset those costs, and it really is no additional cost compared to a similar model,
Okay.
or the other model.
So I guess the other thing would be, I mean, just in terms of evaluating, you know, if you're trying to, if you're sitting here trying to evaluate, assess, justify, explain, you know, sort of measuring certain things, so number of hours would be one thing, I guess, some sort of metrics that the curriculum, you know, those extra hours is actually leading to a better curriculum, and I don't know how you would measure that in terms of, I mean, obviously, over time, you'd hope that MCAS scores would go up, student retention would go up, because there's a better curriculum, and they're not getting drawn off by other alternatives and so forth.
Yeah, and also, hopefully, students' college aspiration rates is an area that we're looking to improve. Also,
So that actually brings
communication
up-
to the community about the curricular expectations, because we've been trying to improve our website to show the additional resources that we're putting towards curriculum. So that would be
Yeah.
another way to visually show the improvements.
So, I mean, that actually brings up another one. I was reading an article, they were talking about, you know, seems like we're measuring college aspiration and not technical school aspiration, which means post-high school but technical, so not an Assabet Valley replacement, but somebody who goes through a traditional high school and then says, you know, I want to go to a technical school as opposed to, you know, going to a traditional college.
Well, I'll add that we believe that all schooling is great, and we actually are working on an MOU with Boston Architectural College, which is focused on hands-on, more of the, even though they end up being architects, it's less theory and more hands-on for students who will learn in that modality. So we are actually working on MOUs with community colleges and you know, universities, as well as some other more technical schools like that, because we do believe in that. And we're actually going to work on a grant with some of these schools to try and bring in some more resources to help with that. So
Yeah.
that's in the process in the future.
Electronics would be a nice thing too, particularly with WAVM.
Yes. Oh, yes. Sound engineering is an area of expansion for our programming right now that we're looking at, but also engineering and some, you know, pretty high-profile schools as well that we're looking at.
What trends relative to teacher, oh, excuse me, did anybody have any other question on that one in terms of school administration? What trends relative to teacher retention are being evaluated? What are these trends and what's their impact on the Maynard Public School budget?
I know Dawn had done some research on that, so I'll
Yeah, sure, yeah.
relinquish my
Yeah.
seat for that.
Sure. Actually, it was Michelle that noticed.
Right.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
So Michelle does a great job for us in a lot of areas, and she often catches the mistakes on the DESE website before we do, which is great. State average for teacher retention is right around 86, 87%. And Michelle noticed last fall it fell to 80%, I want to say. So between discussions with the state and some talk about how our old data entry person might have made some mistakes, our actual teacher retention is 90.9%, which is way above state average. So that was actually really good news. So I was glad that Michelle saw that, saw the importance of it, and did some digging, and now we actually have a new data entry person. This is not the only data entry issue we've discovered. So we're actually above state average, so we're really happy to see that. So people
So I
were
think
worried
you
that that was a
referred-
real number.
I think you all referred earlier to surveys that you all do to assess satisfaction.
Sometimes.
That get done?
Sometimes. We do a lot of exit interviews. That's usually where we get better information.
Okay. Any other questions on that? And then there have been ongoing discussions to make changes to the way the foundation budget is calculated. I know that that's been in the news, and I know we talked to Kate Hogan a significant number of times. One of the big worries I think that a lot of us have is that Maynard, being a smaller town, but having a lot of the things that a larger town has, but without the numbers. You know, a lot of these rules are getting made to help out large urban areas and not micro-urban areas like Maynard. And so I'm interested to know what we're doing in terms of providing data. Maybe, are we providing data to Kate to sit there and say, hey, look, this is what, the new foundation budget would mean, a net loss for Maynard, and so.
So I did a presentation, I think
Yep.
twice, for Senator Jamie Eldridge and.
Senator Hogan.
Yep.
Sorry. So we have discussed on what the improvements to the foundation budget would mean for Maynard. It's not a ton of money.
No, it's not.
But I will tell you that I was at a MASBO event last week where Governor Charlie Baker spoke, and he actually mentioned, because Mike can attest to this, when we saw the reduction in the first initial budget to our foundation aid, I actually called them and was like, what is going on here? And it was because our student population had dropped by 43 students. We were kind of teetering on the edge of foundation aid, so we actually missed out on it this year. My office spent a good amount of time making sure we were going through our data that we had submitted to the state to really verify, because we were so close to the edge that we were praying that we would find something that would bring us back up. We couldn't. The information that was reported was correct, and we couldn't find an error there. But I will tell you that when he spoke at MASBO, he actually kind of, I won't say he was mentioning us, but he did mention the fact that there is some look into the foundation formula and what they were going to do, because small districts were feeling the hurt when they were losing the student population, when the student population was declining, and what they could do for us. Because he had spoken to originally that when this was all enacted, it was more looking at how can we keep up with the increase. They were having an increase in students coming into district and having to be able to fund that increase. We're in kind of the reverse now. So they are, I was confidently optimistic that is on their radar. I'm not going to say I'm the only person that called to talk about it. I'm sure he heard it from some other small districts that felt it the same way we did this year.
What are some of the other small districts?
I don't know specifically.
No, that's
at
why
the
I'm
time.
wondering.
I don't know. You can
yeah.
actually go on the Department of Ed's website and see what everybody's Chapter 70 funding in and what their increase or decrease in student population was.
Also, it was just you, so thank you.
Yeah. I'd like to say that, but I can't take all the credit, because we collectively work together as a business group of us. We all collectively work together in trying to push this, all aspects of the foundation budget and how it affects each district.
So this is hugely critical right now, and I don't need to tell you guys, you all live this, I understand this, but this is hugely critical for our town. And the problem is, there's a lot of attention on this right now, and now's the time when we can wave the red flag and say, this needs to be done.
So,
I read an article in Commonwealth Mag, and they were talking about, they had interviewed Fairhaven, which is a micro-urban community down by New Bedford, and they were talking about how they're concerned about this. And I think we really need to pull out all the guns.
Yeah, I agree.
Not only to advocate, but to give specific recommendations on what levers, what measures, whatever is going into their formula that's giving us less money needs to be changed in order to give us more money, okay?
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, it's true.
I mean, you're
Okay?
right,
I mean,
right.
it's
And
true.
I do think, like,
Because
as
they're trying
MASBO
to
as
give
an
more money to urban communities in order to acknowledge the costs that urban communities have. And because our numbers are so low, we're not getting it. And unfortunately, because there are relatively fewer micro-urban communities like us, then it's easy for them to one, ignore it, or two, sit there and go, well, what do you want us to do? And so I guess I would say, let's give them specifically what we want them to do. Give them a formula that sits there and says, here's what we think the formula ought to be in order to address this. So that's what I guess I would like to see.
I would say that in that.
Sorry?
It's a town's meeting with MAY.
I would say in that same conversation with Charlie Baker, we did hear from rural districts that are looking for some sort of help their way. And I know that they have their own committee and focus group that's.
I'm not worried about them.
All I'm saying is
I'm
that.
only worried about us.
Is that, our group, you just gotta get with the right people and make your voice the loudest.
So how do we do that? I mean, I'm honestly just asking.
Yeah.
I think,
Because
so
falling
within
on
my
your shoulders alone
organization,
is
we
not
have
intent.
had the conversations within my organization that I'm a member of.
Sure.
And we're trying to formulate how we all move together, how we make sure that our voice is actually heard. I mean, one of the things is we communicate with Kate Hogan. All the time, and she kind of makes our voice heard at that level, as well as within my organization, we work together to try and make our voices heard as well.
Do we know what the formula is that they're proposing?
Yeah, I think when I presented on it, it broke it out.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
And so if we know what the formula is, can't we?
Well, I don't know if we know every single lever, they have an entire committee, the Budget Review Committee that
I
went through
understand.
this, but.
But even if we came up with one or two levers and said, this is how that lever gets reflected in an urban community and a rural community, but in a community like Maynard or Fairhaven or whatever, is it Millis? We keep talking about Millis being one of the comparative towns. Are they a comparative here? Do they have?
The other thing I'll say, as far as the levers, so our association, the Superintendent's Association, also have this concern about equity. And so they're making some recommendations on things that are universal for all districts that should be considered in the formula, like special ed transportation, right? Everybody has that need, so if you provide more money for that, that would help everybody regardless of their playing field. So those are some of the levers that we can help balance. We could ask them to look at those levers instead of their formula specifically and shift funding that way across things that everybody needs.
Well, and I think another one is the charter schools. I mean, that's
Which
that's
he did speak of as well.
I mean, everyone's sort of around the same levers. It's health insurance, charter schools, and special ed reimbursement of all kinds. Yeah, ELL, which isn't our biggest one, but it would help. So I mean, this.
So it's great that, the organizations that are closest and who are the most knowledgeable are having these kind of discussions. But Justin, you said in a school committee meeting a month ago, when Kate Hogan was there, what else can the rest of us do to, impress upon the people that are going to vote up or down this change, and could we, gather together with some other communities, large or small, to say this has to be changed in a sensible way.
Through my professional organization, I attended a Fund Our Future that Lexington hosted.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been working on is trying to figure out the mechanism to bring Fund Our Future to Maynard and maybe partner with some of the surrounding communities, like AB or Lincoln Sudbury or something along those lines. We're not comparable districts in any way, shape, or form, but partnering together, increases our voice. So Fund Our Future is a grassroots campaign. It's being run primarily through the Mass Teachers Association, which I am a member. Many members of our community are. So it's something that I've been working on. However, I will freely admit that I've been distracted by a lot of other things that have been in front of our board recently. So it is a mechanism that we can use.
I was also made aware that at the State House on Friday, they had a Funding Our Future hearing, where they had so many districts that had to go long, including our associations testifying as to what they should be doing with the funding formula.
Finally, the Massachusetts Association of School Committees has a pretty active advocacy wing as well, because they, being the school board organization, have a direct interest in making sure that our schools are well funded and we're providing the education that our children deserve. So there's multiple avenues. The question ultimately then is, how do you get all of these separate organizations together? But I think at the minimum, so many people engaging in the dialogue is putting pressure on our elected officials to fix what's a broken system.
So I appreciate that. I guess I would like to see a concrete proposal that would help our town. Okay, and with the idea that we could then say to other towns, other small towns like us, if you're a micro-urban community, you take a look at how this formula or this change in the levers might affect you. And if you get enough people, now you have a concrete proposal that you could put forward. And that's better than, I think, just strictly advocacy with saying, this is important, this is important, this is important, in a very, general way as opposed to specific, so.
So I wildly agree with that, I do.
It's
but I
twice
think-
tonight.
But, yeah, it's amazing. But I really do believe this is one of those opportunities that parents, teachers, community members, all together, the other side of the coin is that loud voices, lots of them saying,
Correct.
informed people saying that this is something that's gotta change now, might change more votes.
Well,
So-
even tonight, we're just sitting here talking about the, the impact of charters, the impact of special education, the impact of other issues, gives us something more specific to say to Kate and to others who are voting.
Yeah.
So maybe if we can't come up with a specific formula, which I still think it's worth a try.
Sure.
At least maybe a short talking points type thing that sits there and says, these are the things that need to be considered, and here are the things that would make a big difference in the way that Maynard's funding.
So is Fund Our Future something, is that the right place to start? Because if we go out of here, we don't do anything about it, we've wasted some time, so.
I don't want to say yes or no as far as whether it's the right place to start, but it is a place to start to educate yourself on the problem.
Sure, yeah.
And, while our chair here in the room says, maybe there's an elegant solution to the funding formula, I'm more of a realist, and I agree with you somewhat that when we start looking at special ed reimbursements, we start looking at transportation, ELLs, and some of those other things that are very concrete and very tangible. I think in the short term, as Dr. Girardi was saying, that providing more financial resources into those very concrete bins, it lifts
It's
all
revenue
those.
from the state.
Exactly.
It is
Exactly.
revenue we desperately need.
Exactly. And it's
And that old thing about the
as well.
schools building and everything else,
Right.
you have more money to do some of that.
Exactly, but if
So-
you're putting people in a room and you're talking about a funding formula that's going to be as applicable to Brockton as it is to small communities out in the Berkshires, I think you're spitting into the wind in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there are people who are much smarter than me that could probably come up with it, but I don't think that that's a solution that's gonna be hit on in 1 month or 3 months or 6 months. I'm more looking at the tangible things that I can see changes to immediately.
So my issue here, I guess, is that at some point, they're gonna come up with a solution,
Yep.
and a bunch of districts are gonna get a lot more money, and there are gonna be some districts that end up with much more, with those same kind of expenses, and yet aren't getting the additional funding.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's gonna, that's what I wanna address. I'm sorry, Bob, you started to say something.
No, I was just gonna say that I think those concrete areas are the area to look at, and what Michelle identified was that we, for the first time, for a long time, we had an increasing enrollment, so we were getting foundation budget, so we were gonna get a decent amount, not as much as you'd like, but at least some amount. That lever in the formula is the key one that's not equitable, because the majority of districts are turning just like us. The state does have declining enrollment across the state, and so there are a significant number of those suburban communities that are going to be negatively impacted, and that's the lever that I think you're looking for, because it's part of the formula. And that's the one main thing that we can advocate for communities with declining enrollment. How are you going to make this formula work for them? So that's the lever, I think, and then as Justin said, those other pots clearly are areas where everybody would benefit, and all boats rise with the tide or whatever.
So we'll call it the Resendez Compromise, right?
Yes. Thanks to Michelle.
Don't
Some-
put my
come
name
on.
on that.
Treaty of Westphalia.
Yeah.
Down in history, okay. Okay, so, any other last questions before we close? So I'm gonna throw it out to the audience. Does the audience have a question? And please pose it to me, and if you have a question, okay, not seeing any. So thank you very much.
Almost.
Yeah, so.
I'm gonna go there so they can hear you over the.
So I just want to make, is this?
It's on, oh.
So I'm curious if the committee is aware of Massachusetts General Law 149, Chapter 149, Section 113, that specifies not only the temperature of the building, but a building, including a public building, that houses employees must be kept in a sanitary condition, and that a leaking roof in multiple places in the Code of Massachusetts regulations is considered an unsanitary condition.
No, but appreciate your informing us. That was Mass General Law what?
149, Section 113. I can provide it to you if you give me your email. I can send you a bunch of information on the topic.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you to the school committee and Maynard Public Schools for coming. A good, not quite 3-hour discussion. To my fellow FinCom members, we're going to meet next Monday. We'll take up this matter today as one a discussion of this as one item. We also have, you all got a copy of the warrant that I sent out?
Yeah.
Long warrant. We got to go through that. And I've asked Bill Nemser to come in and explain the, briefly explain the zoning bylaws changes. And then we will finish up on April 3rd. Do you feel we need to bring any other departments in for discussions?
I honestly don't.
Okay. So April 8th, we will finish up because immediately after that, I have to get our recommendations into the town administrator for inclusion in the warrant.
Mm-hmm.
Any other business for us to conduct? I'll entertain a motion.
Motion adjourned.
Second?
Second?
All those in favor? Adjourned at, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, appreciate it.
Thank you.